Michelle,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you go ahead and turn on your video so we can, or are we not going to have you on video?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, we can do that. Let me.
Okay.
Okay. You're just only seeing my forehead, right?
Yes. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure everything was working okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course.
You could turn your video off if you want.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Judy, is that better?
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle. It's good to see your face.
It's good to see you guys too. Thank you.
Just as a heads up to everybody, we're trying to work out a technical issue and bring someone in. So we're going to stand by a couple minutes and see if we can get that to happen. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is meeting of the Manatee Springs City Council. It's a work session for March 14th, 2023. And the technical problem we were trying to work, apparently we're not going to be able to resolve that in a reasonable time, but Neil can push on his own, I think. So I'll go ahead and do a roll call. And first, remotely, we have Councillor Weatherholt,
Here.
Councillor Chandler,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Fortune,
Present.
Councillor Shada, Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Wolf,
Here.
and Mayor is also present. So, okay, we have a full house. On the printed agenda, we show approval of agenda, but we don't really do that for a work session. So let's move right into discussion. Tonight, we've got 4 items. All of them are somewhat interesting, at least, or very interesting. First is presentation by the match board for the recommendations for the 2023 grant awards. And
John or Mayor,
yes,
I would like to recuse myself from this conversation. And so I'm just going to step out into the hall.
okay, right. Thank you. I think that's a good thing to do. So make yourself comfy out there. We'll come and get you when we get to storm drainage. So Neil, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks. I have a bit of a cold, so I put this on.
Oh, and Neil, if you'll introduce yourself and give us
Oh.
your title and address.
Sorry, Neil Minch, Chair of the Match Board, 151 Clarksley Road. So we were going to do the budget presentation. We did not present, was it in November or the other boards did? And I think we just would like to know, do you want us to do it in November with all the other boards or do it now where we have a bit more information? But we're going to actually begin with the budget presentation. Okay.
Sounds good. Go for it.
We have quite hang on. Let's just move on, please. So the budget as laid out here, Becca has 488,000 as the sales tax revenue expected this year. And the way that's expected to be expended is 476 on grants, 2,400 on staff administrative support, 1,000 for the training that we do in October, November. And then we will be making some further investments in our web application, which we estimated as being up to 9,000. This is on top of the 10,000 that we spent last year. We can move on. Some of the accomplishments, is the 2022 grant round, adding actually 2 new board members. Yes. We did, working with Alex, make some change to the match logo, so it fit better with the city logo, and that is shown here. We did complete the custom website app, which was very fortunate because I'm not sure we would have coped, without that. And I'll show you in a bit a summary of last year's projects. For 2023, obviously, we have our 2023 grant awards. We are going to have to take another look at the match goals and objectives as the program has dramatically increased. We're going to have to take a finer look at this and bring it back to council for some guidance. I'm just going to leave it at that because I'm not sure where that's going to take us yet. We do need to get one additional board member, and we have 2 alternates open. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we will be making some additional updates to our web application. Were there any questions on that?
Apparently not. Go ahead.
Okay, let's move into the 2023 cycle. And I'm going to ask, because there may be questions, we've kind of divided all the applications up amongst ourselves. So I need all the board to come up here, please.
Again, board members, as you come up, when you take your turn on the microphone, if you give us your name and address, please. Thank you. Okay. So let's move on to the next page, please. Because I'll introduce everyone when you can advance. And you can advance again. Okay. This one's right. So with us here tonight, we have Ren Almitra, Jason Wells, Marcus Medina, and Kinsey Watts. For a couple of folks, this is the first board that they have been on. This may even be one of the first council meetings that they've attended. I don't know. Nancy Wilson is in Mexico still, and Ralph is in Florida. He had some last minute issues come up. And of course, Becca's our staff liaison, and Michelle, our council liaison. We will be effective next Wednesday. Ralph will be assuming chair. We had decided it made sense to kind of rotate when we were complete with the cycle rather than midway in, which is the same thing we've done in previous years. Okay, we can move on, please. So this is kind of a summary of 2022. So we had 35 match funded projects, and they were split between events and classes and exhibition, art exhibition installations, concerts, festivals, and then marketplace. And we got the funding that went to each of those categories and the participation. So at the end of each year, each applicant submits what's called a project completion report, which just outlines, what happened.
And that also includes the actual participation. The reason I didn't include a number for the installations is it's almost infinite. Because if you think about impressions, it's probably in the millions. But the others are all actual attendance as shared through the project completion reports. This is one of the things. Sorry, Councillor Wolf.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering, what was the 16,700 people that attended the festival? What festival was that? I think I missed it.
Well, there's 6 festivals. You see the number of projects, 6. So that would included Commonweal, Moonlight Market. What's the one in Soda Springs? No. Summerfest, and a couple of others. I can't think offhand. Yeah, you know, that would have been a big festival. Yeah, that would have been more than coffin races actually.
I think the festival number is 5,312.
Oh,
Right.
yeah. I'm sorry. Marketplace is 16,700, and most of that is Manitou made, and it's people who have interacted or purchased a Manitou made. Manitou made, the online marketplace. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on, please. So this year, the application window closed on January 6th. The reason we moved it from being December 31 is Becca and Natalie got 1,000 people calling them on New Year's Eve to help them with an issue or to do a pass through agreement. So we just moved it a few days so it didn't overlap with the holiday. On January 5th, that's when we had the 5 tier 1s come in and present. January 12th, we invited the top $12 requesters for a Q&A session. It wasn't a presentation, it was so the board could ask questions about the applications, particularly with the budgets. January 26th, we had our first calibration session. February 9th, we had our second calibration session. February 23rd was kind of when we came up with a pretty final, I think it was actually a final list of recommendations. And here we are, tonight. Next page, please. So a summary of the recommendation is between the tier 1s, which is the 66%. So that's $318,979. And then we have 151,000 that we are recommending for the competitive grants. The reason there's a difference between that and the budget is the dollars for our budget come from that pool. And based on this recommendation, there will not be a mid-year cycle. Okay, we can move on, please. So this is the tier 1 recommendation. It's virtually the same as last year because the dollars were virtually the same. We felt that giving Hiawatha Gardens 75,000 so they can finish the planning work made sense. And then the balance of the city project bucket going to the Carnegie Building. And as in previous years, we're doing an equal split between the other three entities. Any questions on that?
Apparently not.
Let's move on, please. So on the competitive grant, so we had 69 applications, and I think half of those came in on the last day. I mean, it was quite a shock. Asking for a total of 327,000. As I mentioned earlier, the web app was an enormous improvement versus our spreadsheets and Google Drives of the past. We are seeing the quality of applications is generally good. Some of you may recall, particularly in our first year, it wasn't so good. There was a lot of missing information. And so given that, we kind of decided it made sense to take a harder look at budgets and try to partially fund a larger number of projects. 78% of these applications are receiving some form of award. What was really interesting was 48 of these were first-time applicants, which is really good. You know, who knows what will happen this time next year. Any questions? Okay, let's move on. So we thought we would start with the mini grants. The mini grant has a simpler application. It's for $750 or less. And you can see even with these mini grants, there's a number that we're only partially funding. Again, we took the approach with every single one of these of looking at the budgets. And where there was what seemed to be fat, carving it out a bit, looking at ways to try and spread these dollars out as widely as possible. Yes.
Go ahead, Julie.
I appreciate that you gave us the project name. Am I guessing correctly? There's no way to know what these projects are about?
Well, actually, if there's a particular project that you want to ask about, one of the enhancements I wanted is like a 12-word summary of what the project is, because at this point, our short descriptions are a couple of sentences, and it would be. But
where are they?
They're in
The sentences.
They're in the application.
Oh,
But
okay. Well,
yeah.
I'll just ask you then. What is the what is the drum circle $750 being used for?
I can speak to that one. That application was for the drum circle of Manitou to purchase some new drum equipment for the drum circle.
The drum equipment is owned by the individual drummers, so we're buying some new drums for some drummers that are part of that drum circle.
We felt that due to the large community impact at the drum circle and the amount of people that come to it,
Oh my
that
God.
it was worthy of.
Wow.
Would these
Who
actually,
gets to keep the drum?
would these actually are drums that
Who
are,
gets to keep the drum? It's just a bunch of individuals. So who keeps the $750 worth of drums? Who's keeping them?
I believe it would be the
Who
gentleman
owns
that
them?
did the application, which is part of the group of the drum circle.
So whoever was on the application gets to buy themselves $750 worth of drums? Those people who were
Drum
on your,
equipment and
who was on your applications? I want to know who's getting all that money. I should have applied. I'd love a new drum.
Okay, let's go ahead and let
Um,
Neil go through his
Yeah,
presentation. and then
okay,
we'll
I'll
come
let
back
you
to
finish the
questions.
presentation, but I'd really like to see in the future, I'd like to have, even if it's, you know, a half a paragraph or 2, 3 sentences, some information about what these things are. And that's not because I mistrust any of you at all. It's because we're supposed to approve and say, we really agree with, this is really cool. We agree with your decisions. And when all we get is just a few words, wormhole bins. I'm supposed to approve $750 of wormhole bins. I have no idea what that is. But anyway, I'll let you finish your presentation. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we will have a short description next year that we can systematically download. At this point, we have to create that by hand, but I understand and agree with your need. But you know, this is a good time to be asking what some of these are. I mean, well, there's 69 of them.
All right. Judith, did you have a question or comment?
I had a question. First of all, thank you for all the tremendous hard work you do. This is just amazing. I had a question about the Colorado Springs Philharmonic, the $750. Could you describe what the reward was for? Award.
I could take that one also. That was a grant that came from the Manitou Springs Elementary School. And the principal was asking to bring the Philharmonic to the school so that the kids could get exposed to that music.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and let Neil finish his presentation and then we can go ahead and ask questions. It may be that the description will answer a few things. So back to you, Neil.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on to page 2 then, onto the next page. So this is the applications that are greater than $750. So there was 45 of these. And that was 311,000. Now I think I should call out as we're going in here that there is one application that is being disputed, and that's to be on the last page. That was a application by Dave Wolverton for a Miramont Castle architectural interpretive website. Without having Dave, I think Dave and Peggy are probably going to come next week. I don't think it would be productive to talk about that without them being here. I know a couple of you are aware of this already, but you know, Mayor, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think it probably would be, it seems appropriate to wait till next week, give them an opportunity to be here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been surprised to see them here tonight, but they're not. So let's anticipate covering that at a future meeting.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, Julie, go ahead.
I'm not sure if it's legal to give tax money to a religious entity. I don't know if it's appropriate to give a church security cameras or free pencils or anything else, because we have church and state separation. So I would suggest that be run by our city attorney before we start giving money away to churches, because this is tax money. Thank you.
Okay, take a note of that.
Okay. Let's move on then, please. So you can kind of see that these are in ascending order. So as the pages go on, the dollar amounts increase. And I have a page at the end, which is the applications that are not receiving any award. Okay. So Kinsey, are we able to do an export of the short descriptions from the web application? I'm just wondering if we could actually send that out.
You know, I was just going to ask, what would probably be easier is for me to create a new role in the application where city council members could just log in and see the same lists and all the details that we have. I was curious if there is anything we would want to hide or if they could see exactly what we
No,
see, because
they
we
should
could make
see
that
everything.
very easy if that's the case. And we've got a detailed list and.
Would you like a printout or would you like access to the app?
I was a little startled. Something you're going to hide?
Uh,
Yeah, I think it's all horrible.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Then we have everything in one consolidated new website that
So-
makes it very easy to navigate.
So
And
how
I
come the
can,
public can't see this? I'm a little disturbed that it only be council be able to see this.
well, they are the actual applications and all the personal details.
So
of
you just
everyone.
make them viewable to the public and put a link on the city webpage.
There's phone numbers, email addresses.
I'm suggesting that we make it only available to city council members in the current state that we have it, the same as the
Yeah,
board has
I
access.
guess I don't like that. I guess if it's available to us, it has to be available to the public. Yeah.
Well,
I would wonder though, if that might make applicants a little wary about applying in the future if they know that their full application is visible. I mean, anyone could
I
go and
would
see.
think so. They're
all the
getting
others.
public money.
So if it's better to just give you a list of the short descriptions. This is a list of all the applications here. At this point, the only people who have access are the board, because that's how we go in and do all the ratings and everything. I think we might need some advice on how we handle making the database, the app publicly visible, and how we remove the personal information. Because I don't have an answer to that.
We should be able to redact the phone numbers and emails, but let's look and see what we can do and get to council and make it public for everybody. So let's look and see what we can make happen.
Okay.
It would seem to me in the near term, for this go round, maybe a redacted printout would be the easiest
Yeah,
thing. and
we'll
then-
just export the short descriptions if we can. Okay. Jason?
But it's just personal information aside, we can't have everyone have the same functionality. Otherwise,
No.
whether it's members of
be
the council or
read-only.
general public would be able to go in and rank every applicant. And that's the board's purview, not even council. So there needs to be some sort of ultimately different dynamic with whether it's members of the public or council logging in to not be able to rank applications.
Yeah, I think there's some security issues that certainly come into play, and I don't know what the answer on that is right
No.
away. But let's think about this as an opportunity for the future and try to focus on the now.
Okay, so but just as I said, moving down the list here, we got people here who can answer specific questions. Otherwise, we'll just keep moving on. Yes,
I want to know who's getting $750 worth of drums. That's what I want to know. I want to know who's getting that money.
Okay.
Those lucky people,
yeah,
just random people. Yeah, I'd like to know the names of them. Do you have that with you?
That application was put in by Ben Hall.
Oh, so Ben himself,
Yeah.
just Ben?
My understanding, and this is just off my recollection, my understanding is that what they intend to do with those funds is to raffle off drums throughout the season. And I think it's a raffle program, but the intent that whoever the winners would bring them back each week, and it would encourage people to show up more on those Thursday nights if there were a raffle. And I don't understand it to be that they would be part of the drum circle community. They would be individually owned, but they'd be raffled off to people who theoretically would be showing up to the circle.
So is
and
it a paid
participating.
raffle where you have to pay money to? I
No.
mean, drums are expensive.
Yeah,
So
and so, yeah, full disclosure, I own a business that they moved the circle inside this year during the cold season. And I think we had 2 of those events at the Armadillo Ranch, and they did raffle off drums to individuals. So I believe that the way the application read is that they intended to do the same, and we're just asking for funds to help underwrite that raffle. But it wasn't something that people were paying for, at least when they did it at our establishment.
And what is Wormhole Bins? $750 for that.
That one was gonna be, they were gonna make, I believe it was 16-gallon bins and then have artists from Manitou paint on the bins, and then at the Pollinator Festival, raffle those bins off to community members.
Thank you.
Okay, Judith?
Thank you. I really appreciate getting the short, description. I appreciate that. So I'll wait for that. But I did have one question. The Indigenous Peoples' Day is listed as having 2 separate applications and
There's several.
many.
Several.
Not the least of which is one is $6,000 and another
Yes.
is $2,000. So are those, can you briefly describe those
Yes.
different applications? Thank you.
So these 6,001 is really the cultural event. That was actually the mayor's the applicant, and that is bringing in tribe members from I think around the state.
Well,
Well-
actually be some out of state. I could
Yeah.
perhaps briefly address this one, Neil. I don't mean to preempt you, but Judith, to kind of answer your question. Yeah, I put in the application, one for $6,000 for Indigenous Peoples' Day. Let me back up. After last Indigenous Peoples' Day, a few weeks afterwards, Becca Sickbird had contacted some of the members of the Indigenous Peoples' Day Committee and suggested that there actually be 4 separate applications made, one each for a separate day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And there'd be basically a sequence of 4 festivals, each one handled separately. That was her idea. The Indigenous Peoples' Day committee talked about it a little bit. At the end of the year, we hadn't really come to a decision, so I went ahead and made the application for sort of the basic cultural event that was similar to what we did this last Sunday. The other groups, there were 2 others that operated independently of me. One, I believe, was the elementary school principal whose basic idea, I think she asked for $2,000 to sponsor dancing at the school. And we were able to do that this last year, although there was actually a little over $12,000 in cash provided by other entities outside of the match funding we used. So we had quite a bit of leverage on that money. And then the other, I think the third application was somewhere in the neighborhood of $14,000, I think initially, and it was reduced. And I'm not completely sure what all the details on that were for. I know what was talked about was a documentary film festival, an Indigenous Artists Day to include demonstrations of Indigenous art techniques, and then something at the school on Monday.
And that was Lynn Harwell and Don Godey who did that application. So the middle school is receiving 50% what they asked for. We felt that the core event deserved full funding, and we're seeing a bit how much the other one's getting, but it's definitely partial. And Councillor Wolf, the drums are part of the drum pool, which anyone attending the drum circle gets to play. So I think that they bring a truck, which is loaded with drums, but who's actually going to be keeping them? I do not know the answer.
Mayor, Michelle's had her hand
I'm
up,
sorry,
so I don't know if she still wants to speak.
yeah,
It went down.
Michelle,
Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I just had a quick question on the art of being strategic. the $500, what that is for?
That one was gonna be to, of a bit of a, like a presentation that will show artists and nonprofits to be more strategic and successful, which would hopefully help people in the art and cultural of Manitou have a chance to take their ideas more into fruition.
Thank you.
Julie?
Are you funding the music group that played last year on some kind of, I don't know if it was supposed to be multicultural day or something, and they were in Soda Springs Park and there were all those noise complaints and they were playing music that was not exactly family friendly in terms of the words of the music. Are they getting money this year? I don't remember the name of that dance, that
Yes.
music group.
That's the Summerfest and 750. Is it 700?
I thought we weren't going to invite them back because they use such crude words and encourage people to do drugs in all their music. Was that not a consideration of your group, or did you know that?
No, I don't.
It was a big to-do last year. Is that going to be in Soda Springs Park again? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
What's the name of that group? I don't see it.
I think,
Project
well,
Eco?
the actual.
Oh, I see, the second to one down. That's them? Oh, they're getting 4,600.
No. The event you're talking about is DS Summerfest.
Could you hear what he said? I can't tell. Somerset? What?
Dear Summerfest.
Theater Somerset? Deer, like with antlers?
Yes.
Which page is it on?
Where is it, guys?
It was on the first page that we already.
It's the fourth one on my list, if that helps. So it would have been number. It would have been number 21. Total.
I don't see anything that says, starts with the word deer. Can you tell me
Yeah,
what line it's on?
I'm trying to. Do we have to go back to the previous page, please? Okay, it's down at the bottom there.
Manitou Movement and
No,
Meditation?
Right above it.
That was hardly meditative. Wait, am I on the wrong page?
it's,
Oh, dear. Oh, thank you.
so they would
Did
be,
did any one of you who are on the committee of making these financial decisions happen to attend their concert last summer?
no,
No? And apparently you're not familiar with the feedback of the neighborhood.
well,
I went to it
Oh, you did?
during the day. I didn't find, I went with my kids. I didn't find anything offensive at that time.
Okay, well, there was a lot of community feedback about that. I'll let you move on.
as far as I know, the event is happening again, so. Okay, let's, we're on page 2 here. We can probably move on to the next page, I think. So this is the last page of recommendations. So, Councillor Chandler, you can see the Indigenous Peoples' Day Festival there. We're recommending 6,000 of the 14. You know, I probably ought to have made a bit more comment. I mean, when we were going through the budgets, we were looking for what in our experience looked to be a bit heavy, or line items that didn't make sense. And so we went in pretty hard at times and made adjustments. And we will be giving applicants the opportunity to confirm that they can still do the project with these funds. In a couple of instances, we were very, very specific about what was being approved. An example would be, Lulu's had some elements that really were not applicable to match. They were more business subsidy, recovery kind of stuff. But the Commonweal were funding music. We're not going to fund the garbage, the composting stations and all that kind of stuff. Those are a couple that, and Project Eco, which I think you mentioned, Councillor Shader. A big piece of that budget request was to pay rent on a building. And we didn't think that was appropriate. So we are funding some of the classes that have to be done in Manitou. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question about anything that that are funded through this? Are people able to take part in these events free of charge? Or
No.
are we funding events in which people are charging money? I am really sensitive to the low-income people in our community, and I'm just wondering, is that part of the criteria? Is that something you've considered?
Yeah, so I think I'm just kind of glancing here. There was the Epic concert. I think they do charge because that's really a subsidy for the cost of the event. But many of these where they do charge, they have some allotment of gratis, tickets. But there's very few here where I see that they actually charge.
So that Summerfest had an admission charge last
yes.
summer.
They do have a charge.
And
Yes.
I'm unacquainted that anybody was let in free.
Yeah, so I don't.
I just was wondering whether that's a policy that we ought to consider developing. I don't know that I want to get into the details with this, but it seems like to me that ought to be one of the criterias that any event or any kind of thing that anybody in our community can take part in, regardless of their economic abilities, that it would be open to the public. It would be posted that these aren't private events, okay? That these are taxpayers' money. This isn't like, I agree with you. I was resonating on your comment about us paying rent for somebody's private business, or that there's some event going on at Lulu's and there's a cover charge to get in and things like that.
Yeah, I know that there's an event here. I think it was the comedy festival where they didn't say they were going to charge, but for that to sustain itself in future years without being funded entirely by match, they're either going to have to find other people to underwrite it or charge some form of admission. But that's a fair comment, and we should include that in our goals and objectives thing, because one of the challenges that we have is for events or projects which apply year after year after year, at what point should they be somewhat self-sustaining? Or should they be permanently funded by match? That's a discussion we need to have. Yes, Julie?
Explain, Lulu's doing community programming now for us. Can you tell me what Lulu's is doing with all that money that you propose we give them?
Yeah,
It just says community programming, comma, planning, $6,750. And we're sitting here and we're supposed to feel comfortable telling the public that we felt really comfortable voting on your recommendations. I don't even know what this is.
okay. So I'm just,
Community programming, that sounds like something the city staff would do. Planning? What are they planning? Future gigs? Sounds like we're just subsidizing a private business.
let me just look at the budget here. Is it 6,000?
You gave them 6,750. They
Yeah.
wanted 44 grand,
Yeah.
according to your chart.
So I think this was, they were going to do some, entertainment and gig economy internships. So it's,
Entertainment internship?
it's for people, students to learn the art of,
So all that
An
money is
events
going to
center.
students? $6,000? You're paying someone to teach the students
and
how to entertain?
and professional development workshops for at-risk high school students. So that ought to be in one sentence.
What?
And what?
We don't. Oh, that's not a sentence in our packet, is it?
No, I'm reading the application and I didn't read the entire sentence. And there's also a mural that will be on the wall facing into where La Fawn was. That was like 1500. La Fawn, the place that was knocked down.
Right. Yeah, council, I'm thinking here, well, if we could maybe let them go ahead and let the match board do its presentation, then I think maybe as council, we may have some additional questions for them to come back. Tentatively, I'd scheduled formal approval of this to be considered next week, but it may be that we'll have to get some additional details on some things. And it may be that council will feel like some programs could be okayed and we could maybe approve those, and then we'd want more information on other things. So you just kind of bear that in mind. Let's let them go ahead and get their presentation.
Okay, let's go to the next page, please. So I kind of talked about this. I think if we go 2 pages on, this would be the projects that we are not recommending funding for. Sure, it's 1 page on or 2 pages on here. So this is the list of projects that we did not recommend funding. The Miramont Castle one is at the bottom there, which I expect will be a topic next week.
Council, maybe be appropriate then to see if you have any questions about any of the other items or
Mayor?
grant applications that were turned down. Judith.
Again, I just want to thank you for all your tremendous hard work. I think that Match is one of the most successful things we've done in this town. And, as a councilwoman sitting here, just wanting to make sure that we are very judicious and prudent in, allotting, 6 figures worth of funding. What I would like to see is those brief descriptions on all of the projects, both the ones that were funded and the ones that were
Everything,
turned down, prior to us coming it back again and having a discussion of what we would be interested in funding. Is that doable, Mayor? That I would need that, at least a brief description And then also supporting Counselor Shada's comment about, when you start something new, it takes several years to work out the kinks. And I think that this is a great time to take a look, this year at that and address maybe some of the issues that, you learn along the way. So
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
thank you again, though.
I'm just going to ask Kinsey again. Did you think we're able to export all the short descriptions? Because that's going to be the key.
It might be a little bit of manual copying and pasting on my part, but I can definitely pull it together. And I think it would also be useful for us to include with that short description our 1 or 2 sentences of feedback that we have gathered as a board for each of those as well. So you can see the application request as well as what we took away from it.
Does that include the score that they received also? I mean, I know you had a scoring system. Would that also include their
It
score?
could.
Is that relevant information that you think we would need to have?
We actually have that in the sort of spreadsheet. I guess we could add that.
The average score rating?
Yeah. That's there, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
nice to include.
I just want to say Kinsey's exceptionally busy with work. And I just want to be careful.
Is it a week? Pull it together?
Well, we are meeting again next Tuesday, and I think they want it in a day or two to be able to read it over. Perhaps we can kind
See what I can do.
of divide and conquer a bit. Okay.
Okay. Julie, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, just, just quick. I've received some feedback from the community, from a couple of people who have expressed concerns about conflict of interest. And I mean, I think it's totally appropriate that Natalie left for this discussion. But the conflict in terms of Neil both being on the board as well as representing another board that's seeking money from the board. And even if he technically didn't vote on his own little project that he wanted funded, it just doesn't smell good. It doesn't look good. I don't know what the solution is right now, but I just wanted to bring that up, that when we're talking about getting the kinks out of this new system, I really think we should look at have some kind of a official policy on how to deal with that.
Okay, understood, Jan. And you can see as things evolve that we encounter things we hadn't anticipated. Okay, we may have some massaging to do with the system as we go forward. I guess the part of the question here is, we're coming up on the summer season. I think we want to get at least some of these things approved.
I don't think we can do a partial. It'd be a nightmare. I think we have to hold these until a slate can be approved. I really would. I guess let's see where we are next week. If it's like half a dozen we have to hold on to, maybe we can manage that.
Okay, well, let's entertain the timeline here. So if everything had, say, gone smoothly and council was very satisfied with what we heard and we didn't have these follow-on questions, we could act next week, at the
Right.
formal meeting a week from tonight. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. The materials for next week's meeting are due to the city clerk tomorrow at noon. There's not much.
We won't get.
No, I understand. So I guess the question is, if we were to push this down the calendar a couple of weeks, that would give you some time, that would give council a little time. I'm just wondering if that causes any real hardship to the recipients. I think most of these are summer kinds of activities, but
School district, they have had programs that are for this semester.
okay, so it'd be between now and in the end of school this year.
Yeah.
So that would create a hardship for those programs.
Yeah, because I don't think that they will do them if they don't have the funding.
Okay. Nancy?
Thanks. I would suggest that council keep itself at the policy level for this go round and not get involved in individual projects. It becomes a game of Jenga if you start pulling out one or messing with individual amounts and so on. I think that this board has been given, over the past 3 years, they were presented with the fairly amorphous mission of any number of, it's not as discrete as most grant programs are, where it's pretty black and white. This is just across the board. And they, I think that they've implemented the philosophy that the citizens voted on back, whatever it was, 3 or 4 years ago now. So I would like to propose that we go ahead. I also trust them because I've seen how the work they do and the effort they put into assessing every single application and being very, very careful with the citizens' dollars. And whereas we might come in with a slightly different opinion, if they had a different board, they might come in with a slightly different opinion as well. It might fall out differently, but so I would like to propose that we go ahead and review this and hopefully not start pulling out individual projects and go ahead and put it on the agenda for next week. And then look at specific policy issues, a couple which have come up tonight.
Okay, thank you. And Michelle, I believe you're the liaison council member to Match. Do you have some comments that you'd like to make?
Yes, I fully trust what the board has done. You know, they're amazing. And like what Counselor Fortune just said, we shouldn't start picking apart all of their hard work and keeping things separate.
Okay, thank you. Kinsey?
If I am able to get the export of short descriptions and our feedback notes as well as the average board score before noon tomorrow, would that solve a lot of problems and make it easier for the board to be able to read that before next meeting?
Denise, do you have comments on that?
Mayor, I was just going to say, if we can have a Monday morning, we can go ahead and post it, and that gives a 24-hour notice. It would be, you would only get it Monday before Tuesday. We could go ahead and post the agenda and have everything there, but that would give you a little bit more time and we could get that posted. And then if you can get us by Monday, we have that 24-hour notice and can upload it at that time and send it out to council that it's been uploaded if council wanted to do that.
Okay, thanks, Denise.
Monday would be easily doable, but I think I might even be able to put it at top of my list for tomorrow's priorities and have it sent out by 11 so that it can get where it needs to by noon.
Okay.
I'm fishing tomorrow.
Council, then I guess let's go around the table here and see, okay, so now we have a proposal. We could go ahead and entertain this as we anticipate, entertain it next week, presumably. Looks like we'd have additional information. We might not get it till Monday, but that's, that's something we'd have that. I think the additional kinds of things that council's asking for, would that be agreeable to council? Julie?
More information is better. So if depending on how informative the few sentences are per line item, it'll help me make a decision. If I have no additional information prior to Tuesday, I'll just vote no on everything. But if I have the information, even if it comes last minute, I'm willing to stay up late and look at it and consider it and be ready for Tuesday night.
Okay, thank you. John?
I guess I'm a little distressed of some of these things in here. For instance, when I look at security cameras for St. Andrew's Church, I guess I'm not as pained as Julie is about the church aspect, but I don't see how that's I don't see how that's art and culture. Okay.
We saw that one. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Marcus.
We see that structure as something that is heritage related to Manitou. And so we felt that the cameras, if they were able to protect that structure, then that's good for the heritage of Manitou Springs.
Okay, I guess my question, I guess, did you have any similar kinds of requests to basically to protect historic structures or?
Well, no, but St. Andrews applied last year and they actually withdrew their application because they felt it wasn't publicly minded enough. It was, I think, for the electric panel. So this, they submitted because of the comments Marcus made, and there weren't any other applications asking for cameras to protect their property.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Nancy, how do you feel?
Yeah, I would like to go forward with this and then address some of these policies issues like the church, if church should ever get in. I know you guys have had extensive discussions about that because you were discussing it when I was your liaison. If everyone should be admitted free, if that would certainly be a policy issue. I don't support that, but I'm very open to the discussion on it. And I can't remember now what the other policy issues were. Potentially who gets, if an individual applies for equipment that is sustainable equipment, you know, and then the nonprofit or whatever group goes away, then who should it go to in the end? So those sorts of things I think are appropriate at our level. But I would prefer to see the slate go forward as it's been determined next week.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
It has been implied that perhaps some of us council members have some mistrust with your decision making, and I find that really disingenuous. And speaking for myself only, I think you've done a tremendous job, and I do trust, you know, the energy you put into this. The bottom line, though, at the end of the day, is the decision to spend this money rests on us, and I just want to make sure that that we have the transparency and the information that we need. And I appreciate, thank you so much for stepping up to the plate for that. I think any information we have when we're spending a large amount of taxpayer money will help us, and then help possibly guide the goals moving forward. So thank you for the information. And I think that that's really important. And it sounds like we can have that before next week. And I'm fine if it drops on Monday. I'm okay with that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Judith. Michelle?
I am good with getting the information on Monday also.
Okay, great. Thanks. And I would be good with that too. And I appreciate your accommodating us on that portion. So council, I think our sense of this is we'll have additional information that may be able to answer some questions by this time next week. We'll go ahead and we'll leave consideration of the match grant proposals on the agenda for next week.
I want to add, I mean, I actually think they're going to need the budgets, because just looking at what the project is because most of our attention went on to what are the costs, what's the budget for each of these elements of the project. You know, I think you're only going to be getting half of what you want, in which case it probably makes sense to just figure out how to give you access to the application, because you're going to have questions about what the heck is this and how much is this piece going to cost. I mean, it will help you understand what the project is. It may not help you understand how we came up with the amount of dollars. And I just want to be clear that it may not answer all your questions, but at least you'll have a better idea what the heck it is. Is that all right? Okay.
So Neil, you're proposing to give us access to your database.
Well, I actually, no, I think we'll keep it as is, but I just wanted to set the expectation that you're still not going to get everything you want because you won't know what the budget is, but at least you'll know what the project is.
Okay. Let's see, Denise and then John.
I was just going to say, if we can help I'll offer staff or myself. So just reach out and we'll see what we can do to help to try to get whatever you may need to have it completed for council.
Okay, thanks Denise. John?
Yeah, can I ask for one minor little thing? In the packet, you had the scoring criteria,
Yes,
But
that's
the-
on,
but the fidelity of how that came through is so faint. Can you send that?
oh, I'm
council?
sorry.
Exactly. It just,
Is that
I don't know
bad?
whether it's like a screen scraper or something like that, but
I think
it's
it is
barely
actually.
readable in the packet.
Okay, okay,
Okay, and I would just, if you could just send that to the city council.
Sure,
you know,
sure.
email
I'll do that.
address. I'm sure there's a better fidelity copy
There
of
is,
that,
there
but
is.
somehow or another, I think it got lost, maybe in the PDF generation. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
But I appreciate that. Thank
And
you.
it's also on a website.
Okay.
The rubric is on the match webpage. Okay, thanks. All right, all right.
Okay, great. Council, any other questions or comments? Michelle? Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much. We appreciate the work you do. It's second guessing what, art in the public eye has always been a challenge, I think, for many cultures and generations. So I think we're making progress. We appreciate the work you've done. We'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you. Yeah. Council, it's a little earlier than when we normally take a break, but since the calendar or the clock is all messed up anyway, I'd suggest we take a 10 or 15-minute break and we'll come back and we'll entertain the exciting world of storm drainage. The next item will be discussion of storm drainage fees, a rate case presentation. So we have Becca Davis here to take the floor.
Good evening. The Storm Drainage Enterprise Fund has never had a rate study performed on its revenues and expenses. And the last rate increase was in 2018, which was an increase from $13 to $15 per utility bill. Inflation has increased the fund's expenses in the last few years, but the revenues have not kept up. Due to this, staff commissioned a rate study analysis from the FCS group to ensure the continued health of the fund. And tonight we have Melanie Hobart, the project manager from FCS, who did the city's rate study. And now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Melanie. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Melanie Hobart. I work for FCS Group. I am a project manager out of our Colorado office here. We have been working with city staff for the past couple months on actually a 3 utility rate study. So we've been working also on water and sewer. We'll be back to talk about that in about 4 or 5 months. We wanted to wait until we got some grant funding and other funding questions out of the way, but we were ready to come to you with storm drainage, and we wanted to do it now because, as you'll see, there are needs for some potential funding adjustments. So with that, I will jump right in. Can we get the next slide, please? All right, the agenda for tonight, I'm going to start with just a couple slides on what we call a rate study 101, just a background about the different types of costs and revenues you would have, how they interact with each other, and kind of what we look for and how we evaluate those. And then after that, we're gonna jump right into stormwater. So we've got about 5 different components here. We're gonna look at what happens if we do nothing. And we're gonna look at our recommendations, your annual obligations and revenues, and then what happens with our recommendations in terms of going forward. And then last, we're gonna look at what that means for your customers. All right, next slide, please. So on a very basic level, a rate study, you know, it's.
Can you get about 3 inches from the microphone?
Closer?
These are
Further?
a little, yeah, just bring it a little closer. Yeah, so you want to be about 3 inches or so.
Is that
Okay.
better?
Yeah, that's better. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. All right. So a rate study is not just a financial exercise. It is, the basis of it is in numbers, is in dollars. But really it's a look at not just the finances, but the operations, the capital program. And we work with a number of different staff members throughout the process. It really is much bigger than just looking at the budget and working through that. All right, next slide, please. What we do with the rate study on a very basic level, the utility revenues, the rates, should cover the cost of providing that service. Utilities are enterprise funds. They're supposed to be self-sustaining. And what that means is that you have to have rates or other revenues to cover the full cost of operations and capital going forward. There are 2 primary types of costs. We have operating. That's going to be salaries and benefits. It's going to be inspections, asset repair and maintenance. Anything like that, any administrative costs or overhead costs would go into your operating. Those are regular, they are ongoing. They're typically pretty consistent year over year, except they go up by inflation. So we have seen in the past couple of years just how much inflation has impacted costs overall across the board, not just here. Industry-wide, we're seeing it everywhere. This is something a lot of communities are paying attention to right now. Capital costs also have gone up in the past couple of years, not just due to inflation, but also due to labor, due to supply chain issues. So capital costs are not as regular. You'll have one big project maybe in one year and then nothing the next year, really varying costs over time. And the advantage of that is that you can use your fund balance. You can build funds on hand to fund a capital project down the road. You don't have to rate fund it fully in that individual year. As you can see on the slide here, this little graphic, very simplistic, just kind of shows you the dynamics of how operating year over year grows versus capital. And we'll see that when we look at your forecast. All right, next slide, please. What we're considering tonight is what we call a revenue requirement. What it is in the name. It's a question of how much revenue is required to operate your utility on an annual basis. The components of what goes into that, we talked about some of this already. You have your operating and maintenance costs. Those are going to be those ongoing inflationary increased costs. We have existing debt service. In your case, there's a couple lease agreements, I think about $50,000 to $70,000 a year, given the individual years. We have annual capital spending, also varies year over year. Your staff's doing a great job of getting grants. So a lot of that is grant funded and does not need to be rate funded, but we'll show you that as well. And then there's also fiscal policies. This is something that we recommend. It's something the city has in place. Things like fund balance minimum targets, debt service coverage requirements, anything like that. And I'll walk you through those, the ones that apply here. All right, next slide. We're going to jump into the storm drainage utility. I will say, if you have questions, feel free to ask along the way. We can start that way. If things kind of get backed up, we can maybe pause and address them at the end, but I want to keep this an interactive conversation as it needs to be as we go through. All right, next slide, please. So just to start, what is the storm drainage utility? Here in the city, this is actually language from your budget document. So the fund is responsible for flood mitigation projects. There are also a number of mandatory monitoring programs. The city is considered a phase 2 stormwater requirement. That's the permit you have, the MS4. And there are just monitoring requirements that go with that will cost you money. It just is what it is. On top of that, you have certain structures in the utility. You've got inlets, you've got pipes and channels and culverts all across your city. Anything, if you think about it, that is controlling the runoff of water throughout your town. So whether it's, bringing it into a side of a street instead of down, whether it's controlling, whether it's a storm drain, anything like that, that's going to be part of your storm drainage utility. And then, go ahead.
May I make a statement here? I want to remember last year when we did the CRS, the community rating system that Karen and our stormwater people worked on, and we were able to get the CRS down, which then saved everybody money on their flood insurance and other insurance. That's part of what we are doing here. Is there are certain things we have to do to keep that CRS down, which saves residents money over the long run.
Denise, for my benefit, would you refresh our memories as to what CRS stands for?
The community rating system, and it's a federal rating system, and we have to go through and talk about everything we do, all that we do from a stormwater perspective, the monitoring we do, all of that is that report that Karen did.
Thank you.
All right. Additionally, the utility is responsible for street sweeping. It assists with snow and debris removal throughout the year. And then, as I already mentioned, the compliance with the MS4 permit, which is a federal requirement.
Excuse me, question.
Yes.
Do you know, okay, so that the MS4 permit, that's an EPA?
It's a federal EPA
Federal,
requirement.
Okay. Do you know how much we spend on monitoring or satisfying that per year?
I do not. That's something maybe Becca and I can work on and get back to you with that number. That's something that staff would have a better familiarity with.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this one's got a lot on it. The idea here is that I want to familiarize you with the assumptions we are using when we look at the results that are going to come up on the next couple slides. The first things here, as I already mentioned, inflation has been higher the past couple of years. We are starting a little higher than we generally would and phasing it down. So for both general and construction cost inflation, we're starting at 5%, but we're actually down to 3.5% annual increases by 2025. That's aligned both with the indices we use for current rates, as well as the professional projections going forward. We also have, the construction cost inflation is what we use to increase your capital costs over time. Your capital dollars are in today's dollars. So we're going to see that impact of that in your forecast. The general cost inflation, we have a couple others we use as well. We look at each individual line of your budget and we assign it the appropriate inflationary factor, recognizing that, you know, salaries might go up differently than equipment or capital costs or anything like that. So we do go through that whole process. But our general cost inflation that we're using and kind of the average of the other ones come out to about 3.5 per year, starting in 2025. We are being conservative here when we come to growth rates. We are assuming that there is no growth year over year in the city. And I want to give you a little background of why that's conservative and why we're doing it. The growth rate is how we project your rate revenue going forward. So it's just used to project revenues. So the conservative approach is to assume that you will not have any additional customers coming on in future years. I think historically there's maybe been a couple new connections per year, but it has been really minimal. So to be conservative, we always recommend that you kind of round down your growth rate so that we're never over forecasting the amount of revenue you have coming in and putting yourself in a situation down the road where you have less revenues and maybe more expenses. When we talk about fiscal policy targets, I mentioned these before. There are two main ones, which we're going to look at today. Those are the fund balance minimums. So for your operating reserve, your general kind of day-to-day reserve, the city has a policy, I think it's 11 to 18% of annual expenses. We talk about it in terms of days cash on hand. That comes out to 40 to 66 days. What that means is if revenue stopped coming in today, you would be able to continue to provide services at their current level for 40 days or more, right? So we're making sure that you have enough cash on hand in your account at any given time to continue operations for that number of days. For stormwater, this is really consistent with industry standard. For stormwater, you can go as low as about 30 days. You can go as high as 90. So 40 to 66 is right in line with what we would recommend. And again, that is a city policy. For the capital reserve, we look at the capital reserve differently. So for capital, we start with your annual depreciation amount of your existing system, which I believe is, let me look at my notes, 419,000 in 2023. And then as we build additional assets, we're adding 1% of that value onto your balance target. For capital, the idea is that for operating, that 40-day minimum is a hard minimum. We would never recommend a forecast where you go below that. For capital, depending on the forecast, we're not going to push rates to hold that minimum. You might go down it in a single year. I do not believe, and in fact, I know that for stormwater, you are not. But from a policy side, the capital target is a little softer. We might let you bump down in a given year. The idea of the capital target is that if you have a system failure, you have the cash on hand to fix it without having to go for outside money. And again, that is a city policy. So that's how we've set that. And just for your information, we're going to look at it in a minute. We're going to talk about the combined target. So our combined target in 2023 is 460,000. 41,000 of that, 41,500 of that is your operating 40 days, that minimum operating. And then the remainder of that, about 419,000 is your capital. So combined, it comes out to that 460, and it is going to increase year over year because both operating expenses are going up. So as you take a percentage of your annual operating, the target is going to go up. And as you invest in your system, you're going to add that 1% of any capital into it, and your capital target's going to go up. So you'll see that. But I wanted to go through that detail here, is that's one of the things we're going to focus on. And then the last thing I want to touch on, and then we can take questions on this slide because I know there's a lot here. The last thing is that, as Becca mentioned, there have not been rate changes for storm drainage since 2018. I believe in 2018, the rate went from $13 to $15. And there has not been a rate study done. So we are here. This is what we do. I'll walk you through kind of the steps and why we're recommending what we recommend. But that's kind of the background that we started with here. Any questions on the overall assumptions?
Mayor, may I just make a statement?
Denise.
Is how it's been done in the past, the Public Works Director would say, hey, it looks like we're getting a little bit low on cash, or it looks like we're needing something, and they would just come up with a number. And this year we got together and said that's not the best policy or best process as we move forward. So that's why we're really doing a stormwater rate case at this point, or a rate analysis for you to evaluate and look at.
Thank you.
All right, we can go to the next slide and we will start diving into the numbers here. So where I'm going to start, this is the combined ending fund balance. In the bars, that's your total cash. And at the end of the year, and that dashed purple line, that's that combined ending fund target. So what we are looking at here is if you make no changes, if you hold your rates at $15 per month, you continue with the budget year over year, which is again going to go up with inflation each year. And then your capital plan as well. You can see that you have a healthy fund balance now. You will eat right through that by 2027, and you'll be well below your fund balance targets beginning in 2025. So this is just setting the stage in terms of where you are now. Your rates can't sustain the costs as we see them at this point.
Good question. Okay, so you say total combined ending fund balance.
Yes,
What are you combining to get that balance? What funds?
it's just the operating and the capital. So at the end of 2022, I believe we have about $712,000. We pushed through the 2023 revenues and expenses and any capital funding that comes in and any capital costs that go out. And you end here at about 690, I believe. So the 2023 expected costs are going to eat your budget or your funds down a little bit. It's just your cash on hand. It's what you've got available but that does include that minimum target.
Okay, now I think a couple slides into the future here, we'll see. It's a histogram. It shows us a portion of our revenue coming from service charges, a portion from grants, and then there's a little tiny bit from interest. How does that relate to what you're talking about combined?
So this is the funds you have on hand. What we're going to look at is that graphic later is what's available for capital spending. So what we're putting into your capital reserve. The grants are 100% for capital, never operating. The interest can go either way. The way that from a rate perspective, we think about it is we look at your total cash. We hold up to 66 days in your operating fund, and everything over that becomes a capital resource so that you're not then raising rates to fund capital if you have the funds on hand. So one of the things you'll see when we get to that graphic is you see that transfer into capital as a capital resource of all those funds in that first year. So did that answer your question?
It may sink in.
Okay.
I'm frankly a little confused, but
Yeah,
Julie.
this is following up on your question. So this is my guess of what you said.
Okay.
So it's almost like if there's two different bank accounts for the water budget, and one of them is for capital improvements and one of them is for salaries and all that week to week stuff. And it's almost like they're two different bank accounts, but if you combine all that money together, then that's the amount we would have in the bank today. That's 690 under that first big bar. But since we have to keep spending, and then she's factoring in the inflation rate and all that stuff that we saw on the previous slide, that's why all of a sudden we're going to have less than the purple line is how much we're supposed to have, or minimum or something.
Yeah.
Is that right? I mean,
Yes,
like
that's
the
right.
Reader's Digest version.
Yes, that's exactly right. So this is your cash on hand going forward, and we'll see in a couple minutes, you are spending more than you are bringing in on an annual basis.
Okay, thank
And
you.
therefore you're eating into your reserves.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we can, any other questions? Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So this is that revenue requirement I talked about. What we've got here in the bars, we have your stacked expenses. The navy bar at the bottom, that's your annual operating expenses, starting at just under 400,000 in 2023 and growing to kind of just over 400,000 in 2027. That's the impact of inflation there on your operating expenses. Those are based on the budget with a couple adjustments that we worked with city staff on to make sure that, you know, sometimes the budgeting process is more conservative. So we worked with them to make sure we weren't overestimating expenses on an annual basis. The second bar there, that kind of green gray, those are your capital expenses. So year over year, and we'll look at your capital in a minute. Year over year, you are spending varying amounts. And most of the years, it's about 200,000. I believe it is for, do you know off the top of your head?
Most of our spending, the last few years has actually been funded through grants from the CDBG, Community Development Block Grants. And it's working on the sidewalks and gutters of various roads like El Monte and, oh, I can't remember what road we're doing this year. But every single year we've been getting these grants, and that's the main way that the capital is being funded, actually.
That's right. So the lines here on this graphic are your revenues. This is not just your rate revenue. This is also any grant or capital funding you have coming in. So what you can see here, the purple line is if you make no changes to your rates. It is below your expenses. And there's actually an additional expense, which we in version control fell off of this graphic. It's about $50,000. It's that debt service. So your expenses are actually a little bit higher than the graphic shows here, in such that in 2023, if you add that existing lease payment or the lease agreements, you will be spending more than where that purple line is. The yellow line, that dashed line, is if you make these rate changes that we're recommending. You can see that over time, it obviously distances from the purple line. As you increase rates, you're going to be bringing in more rate revenue. The other thing I will note is because of the grants, typically, if we were to do this with only operating expenses and only rate revenue, you'd see kind of a really pretty just graphic that goes up and the line just kind of sits right on top of it. This fluctuation year to year is because of that capital revenue, that grant revenue. Your rate revenue is not fluctuating year to year. Your rate revenue, if you recall, because we're assuming no growth, would be flat until you add these rate changes.
Can you speak to what's happening in fiscal year 26? I mean, everything jumps up there. So what is there? Do we have plans to spend a whole lot of money?
Yes, that is a capital project. So what that is the new storm drain on Pawnee Avenue, Pawnee to Manitou Avenue. I want to say it is budgeted for 400,000 in today's dollars. So it's going to be a little bit more than that. It is grant funded, which is why you also see the revenue lines jumping up with it.
She has a very good memory. That's exactly right.
Well, I have the model open in front of me as well. So I'm cheating, but yes, that's what that is.
I'll just say that may have to be a two-part process because that will assume will be the CDBG grant, which will be huge. They usually don't do that large of grants, so we may have to kind of break that up in a couple of years. But right now we have it under 1 year, and then we'll see how the CDBG grant goes.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. And I will say, because it is 100% grant funded, if the timing changes, it will not have an impact on your revenue requirement or your rate requirements. Yes.
Yeah, Julie, please.
Sorry, I just got completely lost. So after Denise said, I don't know what she said and I don't know what you said. So we might get a grant, or we did get a grant, or we will get a grant, or we might not get a grant.
The assumption is you will get the grant.
It's
The
already been
question
approved.
is, yeah, it has not been approved.
Oh, it's not been approved.
No, it's for 2026. We budget out saying we're going to be doing this year and this year and this year, and we're going to get grants each year, even before we get them, we have to
I see.
budget that.
So the grant hasn't been approved, but it's kind of guaranteed, and that's what you mean?
Well,
Like we're relying on it. There's no matching funds. We're just going to probably get the money, and hence the chart.
so far, so good. That's the way it's been working. So
So we just save it every year until we have 400 grand, and then in 26 we'll have enough to presumably do Pawnee.
no,
No.
in 2026, we're counting on a grant, but normally I think the grants are more like 200. So I'm not quite sure why we put so much in 2026. but probably we're gonna have to like split it in half, 200 one year, 200 the next year.
So the grants are year by year, right? So we apply every year for a grant. We apply for that project. So far, we've been successful. We never know. And if we don't get the grant, then we look for another grant. We figure out something else out. And if we can't get it, then we come back to council and say, okay, here's where we are. We weren't able to get that grant. Here's how much we have in reserves. Do you want us to do this or do you want us to delay it another year? So it's year by year on grants, but we don't get grants 2 years in advance. And you can't save grants, apply for a grant and then save it. They have to expend it within a certain amount of time, especially CDBG or the HUD penalizes them for not spending it.
So do you know what Becca meant, or Becca, can you explain what you meant when you said, if we don't get the grant, we'll split it in half? What are we splitting in half?
Oh, it's the project. That's why there's a big increase there in 2026. It's like counting on getting a grant twice as much as we normally get. So then we'd have to split the project in half and say, we're going to do this part of the road in this year, and then the other part of the road the next year.
Okay.
Literally
Thanks.
splitting
Okay.
the project, the road in half.
Thank you.
Just kind of as a little background, there are, for capital funding, there's, really 4 different options. You can rate fund everything. We're not recommending that, especially if you can get free grant money. Obviously, that's the best option. So that has historically been happening. So we assumed that. The other thing, we had a lot of conversation with staff about this, is exactly like they said, both that if the grant money doesn't come in, there is flexibility in timing of the project. And because the projects aren't for a couple of years out, it's not going to set you up for disaster this coming year. There's time to adjust and move with the changing scenario as it happens. If worst case happens and the grant money doesn't come in, the kind of next level of funding would be a state loan, which is something you utilize a lot for sewer and water. That's, lower than a revenue bond or anything like that. That, of course, is not free. It comes with debt service payments. So we would need to kind of rerun the analysis and look at the impact of that. But because it is several years out, we've got time to be flexible on that. Yeah, of course.
And Mayor, if I could just add, as she is talking, it's important that we rerun the analysis if something doesn't work, right? Because the last thing we want to do is come to you in 2 years and say, oh, stormwater is broke. And we didn't realize that was happening. So we need to stay on top of this and look, and we have a spreadsheet that we'll be adding things to and changing, but every 2 or 3 years, we'll bring them back and say, okay, let's make sure that everything is in compliance with how we had planned it, so that we are staying within our policy and we're keeping you well informed.
That's right. So what we're looking at here, and I haven't even mentioned it, but the rate recommendations we're making, we're not recommending you adopt 5 years of rate changes today or anytime in the, this year. This is something we look at a longer forecast. Our model is a 20-year model. We have focused on these 5 years because that's the known capital plan that you have right now. We recommend, as Denise just said, coming back in at least every couple of years. Part of what you've bought, part of what you've paid for is that model. So the city will own the model. Part of what you've paid for is the training to use it. So at the end of this, your staff will have it in hand. They can be updating it. They'll be ready to kind of just track to make sure everything is going as planned. So that's part of what you've got here is the tool, not just the analysis. Right.
Continue.
Okay. The last thing I want to touch on in this slide is, and I just alluded to it, in the little bubbles above each of the bars, those are our recommended rate increases. So that's a $2 increase that we're recommending in July this year, and then a $2 in January 2024, and then again in January 2025, and then it would be $1 per year on each monthly bill recommended after that. So on January 1st, 2026, the monthly bill would go up by $1. It would stay there until January 1st, 2027, where it would go up by another $1. So that's the recommendation. What we've done here, this is a conservative outlook. But it does assume that you will be funding the portions of your capital that aren't grant funded. So let's look at that. If we want to go to the next slide, please.
No, could you stick with that slide there for just a second? I got a couple questions or comments.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got the dark green area. That represents what we're currently bringing in on service or our service charge, I believe.
So the bars are expenses.
Okay, okay, it says revenue requirement. Okay, but actually, okay, we're talking expenses there.
Mhm.
So, okay, as I look at those dark gray boxes, they're just a little under $400,000.
Yes.
So that's about the same amount we're bringing in our service charges right now. So
That's
we're sort of at break even just to not take on any capital projects. Is that what you're saying?
So from an operating perspective, operating alone, if we were not to include capital, we are projecting that you are going to have a deficit this year of $34,000. So you are bringing in $34,000 less than your operating and debt service obligations in this given year, capital aside. So just from an operating perspective, but that's not an emergency, because as we saw in the fund trajectory, you are above your fund targets. You have that resource at hand, right? So in this given year, just because of the impact of inflation and costs have gone up, and because you don't have growth and you haven't made any rate changes, your revenues haven't changed and your expenses have gone up. So year over year, that's going to continue to get more exaggerated if you don't make any rate changes, just from an operating perspective. So if you took capital completely out of the equation, you still would be eating into your fund balance year over year and be below your target by the end of the 5 years. Yes.
Yeah, Julie?
Thanks. Does it go down to $1.26, $1 a month increase in 2026? Because that's when you're projecting inflation will be back to 3.5 or whatever.
Yeah, so we have inflation back at 3.5 in 2025. The reason that we need a couple years of larger increases is that we are assuming you're going to utilize some of your funds. So we are getting you up to cash flow positive over a couple years instead of doing one bigger jump immediately. So we're using what you have to phase in the rate impacts over those 3 years by $2 each, instead of doing, one $4 increase and sitting. Typically from a messaging perspective, people have different preferences in terms of how they like the rates to go in. We typically recommend something like this, where you're phasing in an increase. It's easier for your customers to absorb. And then additionally, we almost always recommend that you do a sort of inflationary increase every year going forward. So that's roughly what that $1 represents here as you go forward in the forecast, just to represent the fact that costs are going up. And that's a reality that, is a really easy message to translate to your customers, that they're experiencing it too. Unfortunately, they are then experiencing other utility bills, but the reality is that costs change over time.
When you look at this, it's a little more palatable on this slide than I think it will be in reality. If you're looking at this year, we're currently paying $15 a month. Okay, under this proposal, we will have added $8. So
Yes.
customers will be paying $23 a month. Currently in a year, that'd be $180, $15 a month. At $23 a month, that's $276 a year. That's $96 more than what people are paying now. So 5 years from now, they'll be paying $96 more, close to $100. They'll be paying 153% of what we're currently paying. That's when you look at $1 or $2 a month right now, it doesn't seem so bad, but for some people, that's going to tend to be a showstopper, I'm afraid.
May I
So-
address that, Mayor?
Yeah, Julie.
Because that's a really valid point, and that might be one thing that we look at a work session, is to determine if the city wants to make any arrangements to help people in the lower income brackets, because, we probably can't do like the big cities and build all these low income housing and all these huge projects, but we can at least offer discounts to our residents in the lower income brackets who may be struggling with the utility bills, because we absolutely need this money. We need to get the money. In fact, depending on how many people don't pay the increase because of being low income, the rest of us might have to pay $1.50 instead of $1 or what have you. They'll have to just look at it. But I think it would be reasonable for us to look at how much it would cost us to take that out of the general reserves and stick it in the water enterprise.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't take it out of the general reserves because that's tax-based and the enterprise fund can't operate on taxes.
Well, I thought we were talking before about, I thought Jeff said you were allowed to put money from the general reserve into an enterprise. You just can't take it out. And
Yeah,
it makes sense to me.
I think that stands corrected.
a
We can
logical-
put money in that enterprise fund
Yeah.
anytime we want. We did ask that.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me because there's nothing illegal about using tax dollars to help. It's just that you can't steal money out of the enterprise fund and use it for art or anything else. It
Well,
has to be water.
It would threaten its Tabor status.
I think
So-
there's something we might be able to look at, and it's like a Project Cope program. So we need to research it, figure out what that looks like. And there would be a program for low income and put that in. And so we can look at that.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I
that
would
be
think all
like a
these
nonprofit.
grants then would threaten it too.
Federal grants don't count against the Tabor.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions on this slide, maybe we should move on.
Okay, yep, we can jump to the next one. This slide is representing how funds are moving into your capital reserve as a capital resource. So the line here is actually your annual capital spending. Okay, and if you remember earlier, I said, we look at your total cash reserve and we leave some of it in your operating up to 66 days of cash on hand. And we consider everything else a capital resource. The reason we do that is we want to use the cash you have on hand to minimize rate impacts wherever we can, while still maintaining your fiscal policies. That's what we're seeing here in 2023. When we say rate funding, that's the cash you have on hand. We are putting it into your capital reserve as a capital resource. That's not rate revenue coming in that year. It's a little bit confusing, I understand. But that's what that is. That's your cash you have on hand available for capital. Going forward, that gray, that bottom bar is going to be interest on your fund balance. That's all it is in 2024. And then going forward, anything additional rate revenue above your operating target, any net cash flow you have, we're transferring into capital. So it becomes a capital resource. We're not using it in that year. We're using it in the later years. You are cash funding capital projects in, let me look at my notes. I believe it is in 24, 25, and 27. 100% of the remaining projects are grant funded. In our forecast, we are assuming, I believe it's about 80% of your capital will be grant funded. That's awesome. I really want to emphasize that. That is really good. And that's something that, your staff is working really hard to maximize. So that's what you see represented here in that lighter color, that blue color, that's your grant funding coming in. So that's going to cover the 200,000 about per year. And then that larger project we talked about earlier of around 400,000 that might have to be split. If the project is split, the grant funding will be split as well. They fully cancel out in terms of the impact to rates in your forecast. So that's what's happening here. This is really just to help you understand how large of a portion of your capital resources are grants, and how little of an impact the capital plan has on your rates themselves. That's awesome. It does, though, go back to kind of that core issue that you are running an operating deficit going forward because of inflationary impacts and because you haven't been adjusting your rates. So even if you take capital out of the equation, you would still need to make changes to rates in order to fully self-sustain the enterprise fund.
Okay, I guess you're going to have to bear with a slow learner here. But okay, when I look at that first column, okay, so we're at fiscal year 23. And between rate funding and grant funding, we've got, somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $840,000. But our spending is 200,000. So my math says at the end of the year, we'd have about maybe 640,000 left in the bank. That's not carried forward and shown. We don't see what war chest we're building up. So I find it difficult to interpret how, what our actual spending pattern is, our projected ability to reach out and get projects done.
Yes, I agree. In looking at this, I think that what that gray column is representing in 2023 is that transfer of cash on hand as a capital resource. It is not dollars in the door. The other years are dollars in the door. So it is confusing, and we can update this to make it more clear for that. Because I completely understand the confusion there. But this does tie back to that fund balance, right? So what you're seeing here is that $600,000 transfer over is really your funds on hand. It's everything above that capital, that operating minimum of 41,000 that you have on hand.
John, I'm sorry, John.
So are these slides from the model that you're providing?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Julie.
So does this mean that the anticipated 2026 project will be about $700,000 and that all of it guessing would be grant funding? Is that what that big blue line means above
Yes.
26?
Yep. And the rate funding that's going in 25, 26, that interest and that rate funding is going to go towards the capital in 27, where the capital is more than the capital resources coming into the fund in that year. So it balances out over time.
And does this imply then that the grant funding we're getting this year, as well as the next 2 years, all that blue is being spent, or is that being, that's being spent, I guess, because you have to spend it within a certain
It
period of
is.
time, right?
It's being spent. It's
So
tied
these
to
are just other
individual.
projects that we're doing in terms of how you're saying once a year, we try to clean one area up.
That's right. All of the grant funding is tied directly to projects. If we needed additional outside resources, as Denise mentioned earlier, grants have to be tied to projects and they have to be spent within a certain amount of time. So if we needed more money or if we needed additional resource, we would get a loan if we could tie it to projects or bonds. But the grants are 100% matching to the costs of the projects in the plan.
And unlike other grants, they don't require us to do matching funds.
The
That's-
CDBG does not always require, they like for us to put some in if we can, but if there's a chance that we can't, then they allow it. It just really depends on how much is available at the time and what the other requests are.
I was about to say, that's the beauty of the CDBG grants.
Okay, Natalie.
I'm curious if there's an opportunity to kind of shift things around. Like, could we do a $1 increase this year and do a $1.50 increase in 2026?
Yeah.
Just kind of responding to that inflation piece with the prediction that we won't be in that inflationary state in a few years. Is that something we can talk about?
Yes,
Okay.
we can move them around. There are impacts. If you think about it, just, $2 in the door today is more valuable to the utility than that down the road, right? And because the rate increases are cumulative, the $2 is always going to be $2 extra per month now from each customer coming in the door. So if we delay the rate increases, we might have to look at potentially shifting capital or other expenses as well. I know because I ran it that you cannot do $1 per year throughout the full forecast and fund both your operating and capital plan. So you need more than that. If you wanted to not start with a $2 in July, we can run that and might impact the timing of when you'd be able to do those rate funded capital projects. Kind of as a general philosophy, if you think about it, it's essentially like any other budget, right? You have so many expenses and you have so much coming in the door. If there are policy reasons or choices made here, or you determine that it's, that kind of rate increase is not palatable to your customers, the only other option is to reduce costs, right? You got to balance it at the end of the day. So that's always the push and pull here. We can run it for you. We can make recommendations. When it comes to individual projects or the budget, we will defer 100% to the staff who are running the utility. But we can help you understand the impact of any of those changes and kind of, if you are limited to $1 per year increase, what does that buy you? What can you do with it?
Any other questions on this slide? Okay, can we go on?
All right, this is the impact of those rate changes. The first slide we looked at, if you remember, was the fund balance, the combined fund balance. If you made no changes to your rates, this is your combined fund balance. If you do those $2 increases and then $1 going forward, I will say, if you were to extend this to 10 years, that $1 going forward, you are sitting right at that combined fund balance target. So I do recognize that this looks, like maybe the $1 is more aggressive. If you were to delay that, you would need to have higher increases down the road, which is not something we ever want to set you up for. Typically, if you're going to need increases, unless there's a specific project or reason, expansion of services, something like that, we don't like to have lower increases now and higher later. It's easier to kind of either keep it consistent or get you ahead now so that you can have lower ongoing increases. So that's what I want to say about that. But you can see here with those rate impacts, you are sitting, your fund balance stays about where it is currently throughout the forecast. It does over time get much closer to that ending fund balance target.
I completely do not understand this slide. I really do not.
Okay.
I do not.
So what?
Well, I don't know what it's supposed to tell me.
So what this is, so each year, the bar there is the amount of cash you have on hand at the end of the year. So that's going to be like if you have, 700,000 in the bank account at the end of 2023, in 2024, you're going to have operating expenses. You're going to have rate revenues come in. You're going to have capital coming in and out, and you're going to have, 660,000 at the end of 2024 after all those things happen.
Okay, I guess I need to know is how much do I have in the bank? What is my balance on the 1st of January? How much do we expect to take in the course of the year, and how much are we going to spend? And then that's my net, and I carry that forward the next year. And this doesn't tell me that. And when I do the numbers, I get, I'm only using part of the numbers, but it gives me something completely different. I get, for instance, revenue of close to $600,000 in fiscal year 27. That's when we would theoretically be paying $23 per month per utility or per customer. And of course, it scales up. So we'd go from a little less than 400,000 currently to about 440K at $17. That would be the recommended annual revenue at the amount that theoretically we would be adopting in July. It goes to a little less than 500,000 at $19 a month, 543,760 at $21 a month, and then about close to 570. It scales up, and I would expect to see the revenue increase. And this doesn't tell me what the revenue picture is or what the spending picture is. I don't know what projects we have in mind other than the Pawnee drainage. So this isn't very helpful.
So this does not show you what's coming in and out. You're correct. This is the end of your balance. This is the impact of all of that. What's coming in and out is on the revenue requirement graphic we looked at a couple minutes ago, where you have your total operating expenses versus your revenues and your capital expenses each year. That'll show you that in a given year, you're either spending more or less than the revenue you have coming in. So that's kind of the comparison of your total revenues versus expenses in a given year. This is the impact of that on your fund balance at the end of the year.
Okay, Julie.
And this is factoring in the rate increases
Yes.
that you are recommending are factored into this bar
That's
graph.
correct. Can we go back a couple slides to the first one like this? It was the first graphic, this one. Yep. If we did no rate changes, that's what this looks like. These are the same graphic. The only difference is the rate changes to your revenues.
So this is
So-
the comparison to that.
Yes.
With the rate.
With the
change-
$2,
with
the
$2,
$2,
okay,
yep.
That makes more
Yep,
sense. Thank you.
everything else is held the same in these two graphics.
Okay.
This is the difference of your fund, the impact on your fund balance, your long-term sustainability as a utility when you make those rate changes.
Got it. Thank you.
Julie, do you have a question?
Yeah, if I could, I'm getting closer to understanding this chart, but this purple line that goes across, that shows our fund balance, assuming the rate increase, and just picking up on the mayor's comment, this also assumes that we're going to spend about the same amount as we do now on staff, subject to, COLA, inflation. But this assumes that we will be doing projects I think this assumes that we will be doing projects, Mayor, but since we don't spend our own money for them and it's all just paid with grants, then this is kind of what happens to our fund balance if we just pay our staff and do the rate increases they're recommending. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So,
But I still don't understand the difference between combined, and I don't know the difference between what's called a combined ending fund balance target versus a total combined ending. Those two definitions don't mean anything.
So
I
the-
don't know what that means.
So the line, the target, that's the combination of those policies we talked about at the beginning, the 40 to 60 days of operating expenses that you're going to hold in your account at all times. And
So that's
the
like our,
capital
everything
balance.
under the line is kind of our emergency money. on
That's
that
right.
40 to
That's right.
60, whatever it was.
That's showing you where your
And
target
what's
is.
above?
What's above it? The bars are your actual funds.
That's what we're going to use to pay our staff and stuff.
That's how much you have at the end of the year after you pay your staff and you bring in rate revenue and you do your capital projects.
Bring in rate revenue, but that, in other words, that excludes any grant money. This is just
Nope.
if
It
we
includes
do the
everything.
rate increase you're recommending.
It includes the grant money as well.
Oh, it does?
Yep.
That's in the
So,
black.
yeah, yep. So you're going to start with, this is saying, at the end of 23, you have so much money, you're going to spend more than you're bringing in 24. That's why the total funds go down a little bit. They drop in 2024. Going forward, the impact of those rate increases, you can see the funds grow again and then they go back down. This is your cash on hand at the end of the year. This is how much you have in your bank account after you do everything, after you collect rates, after you collect grant money, after you construct the projects, and after you pay your staff and pay your other obligations.
Why does it go down in 24?
Because you're still cash flow negative. That's the impact of phasing in the rates instead of doing one big jump immediately.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And I just want to mention the reason why we are where we are, right, is we haven't done a rate increase for 5 years and prices have gone up. Everything has gone up with that. So we're trying to catch up of 5 years of not doing anything as we continue to increase items. And so that's why we're looking at more of a holistic way to continue to manage the storm drainage so we don't ever have to do this again.
Okay, I guess I'm going to need more detail on this. I think my understanding is that the stormwater department is like 2 employees, plus a little bit of the public works director's time, like 5%, 10% of the city mechanics time. And then I guess we've got the cost of monitoring our stormwater situation to keep EPA happy. So I guess I'd like to know what our basic day-to-day overhead is, Becca, and I don't need that right now, but
We can go through that and bring it next time and make sure
Yeah.
that we have that. I do want to mention, Mayor, you asked about the MS4 permit. That is a holistic thing, and it's not just one thing. It's all that we do from a stormwater perspective. So it's cleaning out the inlets. It's making sure that we're doing the things that we need to do at the creeks whenever those things happen. It's, I'm looking at this, it's the catch basins whenever we're, I mentioned whenever we clean the sidewalks downtown, and Leslie can definitely help with this, but we have to make sure that we put the stops at all the storm drains so that that doesn't go down. We have to make sure that we use special stuff. We have to make sure anytime there's a sewer issue. So all of that becomes part of that MS4 permit. It's not just one thing.
Okay, so and is there do we have to pay just a separate permit fee?
I will
Because
look
I'm
at that. I
confused
don't
on
know if there's a permit fee. I think we have to apply and get it. And then
Yeah.
if we have, it's kind of like water, I believe, and Roy, you may know more, but if we get so many penalties or we get so many, warnings from the state, then those are the ways that they take that permit away, or they put us on suspension or something like that as we move forward.
Right. It's
Okay.
not, a $100,000 per year permit that you're paying for. The permit is requiring certain monitoring actions, certain cleaning of your facilities, all those things, that maintenance and that ongoing, those components of your system. That's what the permit requires. The permit itself doesn't cost money. The actions the permit requires cost staff time and money.
Okay, and currently that's running us around, looks like about $380,000 a year, something like that.
The total budget that we are including for 2023, which is just the budget that was approved, is about 300 and just under 380.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
That's just to pay our staff?
No.
No,
When John said
no,
how many staff
no.
we have, I thought, dang, that does sound kind of like a small.
That's everything. So that's paying staff, the equipment. We bought a back truck a couple of years ago. It's the monitoring system that we have to have on to keep everybody's insurance down. I mean, it's the whole program for public works, or not public works, for the storm drainage. So it's all inclusive of all of those things that we have to manage.
That's right.
okay. Roy?
Yeah, just to add to it, also, the MS4 requirements are for public education, which includes TV time, which we cooperate with other cities to do that, radio time, pamphlets, things like that. So there's a lot involved in the MS4. And if we don't follow it, we could be fined by the federal government for polluting the streams and creeks. So we have to do all these things to keep that out of those areas.
Okay, thanks. And that gets to, I guess, the real reason behind my question is what's the cost of what we have to do and what are we doing now? I mean, because part of it is, are we really getting the most out of our money now? And and I got a call from a guy about 3 weeks ago, an older man, and he was complaining about his water rates, and we talked for a while, and I didn't have anything I could say that really would comfort him, and he's on a fixed income, and so we just had to part company, not liking each other very much, I guess. So anyway, anybody else? Or okay, go ahead. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Judith.
Thank you. Along those same lines, so when you get your water bill, that little yellow card, and there's all sorts of line items, right, with all sorts of different fees that we charge. So this is just one fee out of the total number of fees, and we already raised water rates this year. And we had a little bit of a discussion about, the impact on low income people. So this is an additional charge. And my question is, this $2 specifically and can only be used for the storm. I mean, we can't
That's correct.
extract any of that to be used on any other water enterprise
That's correct.
i-
Yeah.
issues that we would have.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think that's part of the discussion of, if we're going to raise other items on our water fees, how do we incorporate that into adjusting whether we're going to charge $1 or $2? And I do totally agree with the mayor that I really want to make sure that we are totally and completely, efficiently running this system so that when we do talk to people about their, water rates increase, we can be, really educated about the response that we give. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any more questions relative to this slide, I would propose we move on.
Okay, the next slide, please. From here, this is really the last slide. This is just the impact on your monthly the monthly bills. As you had mentioned before, Mayor, we are going from $15, that navy bar would be consistent if you made no changes, to the green bars, and what that total rate is monthly for your customers. I do want to kind of address a couple comments that were made. First, as an enterprise fund, the rate revenue that comes in can only be used on this utility. It goes for any individual enterprise fund. You can't take rate revenue and apply it to general fund costs. You can't take it and apply it to a different enterprise without, an official loan repayment kind of system, right? You have to be self-sustaining in that way with your rate revenue. You are restricted how you use it. So that is a restriction. That is a legal restriction. That is the nature of enterprise funds. Beyond that, this is something I have a lot of empathy for you. This is something that we are coming across a lot. Inflation is up, costs are up. Unfortunately, inflation impacts utility costs as well, right? This is something that everybody is addressing right now, the impact on their customers. As I mentioned before, ultimately the costs are the costs. So if we can't bring in more revenue, then we kind of got to go back and say, what are the costs? Right? I would say in my experience, it's certainly worth looking at the costs. There's generally not much wiggle room there. I think it's definitely an exercise to go through if you're concerned, but it's probably not, it's not going to eliminate the need for rate increases over time. It might adjust when or how much, but ultimately your revenues are staying the same and your expenses are going up. That's just the nature of how the dollars work. That said, I also want to address, I mentioned earlier that we are also working on a water and sewer rate study. We do not have results for you today. The reason we don't have results for you today is because, similar to the grants here, we are waiting to find out what kind of loans and lower cost outside funding you can get to minimize the impact on rates. So ultimately, we're just kind of waiting to see how those play out. Those rate changes wouldn't go into effect at the earliest until January. So they're not relevant today in terms of this discussion, but I do recognize that they are relevant to your customers in that they pay one utility bill and they all work together. So we're at a little bit of a disadvantage today in that we only have stormwater to look at. There are good reasons for that, but I understand that challenge of not knowing how that's going to play with the water and sewer changes that come later.
Denise, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to mention that's why the $1 million DOLA is so important and the loan that we're trying to get, because those things will really help keep those rates down. Plus, we're waiting for the audit for the end of the official audit, which then we can plug those numbers in, and the water and those would not go into effect until next year because we've already done that for this year. So that is not something that we need to get done immediately. And we really do need to know what we'll get in loans and grants as we move forward, because that will make a huge impact.
May I make a comment, please?
Yeah, Judith, go ahead.
And I just want us all to be clear that really we're not talking about a $2 annual increase. We're talking about a $2 annual increase in July and another bump in 6 months in January of 2024, at the same time that we're going to be possibly looking at other increases in other fees. So just being mindful that on the slide, it looks like we're doing $2 a year, but in the short term, we're looking at a 6-month bump. So really it will be in a 6-month time frame starting in July, it'll be $4.
That's right.
So-
Their January bill will be
Yes.
$4 more than their bill today.
Yes.
If this plan is enacted, that is correct. Yes.
And possibly higher if there other rate studies come in and say that we're not,
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
That's right. Yep. And again, to kind of questions earlier, we can look at it. We can look at maybe doing $1.50, but really there is always that kind of crunch in terms of you do have to sustain the operations and you have to meet your compliance. You have to stay in compliance with your permit. So there's a little bit of wiggle room, and we can kind of really try and massage the numbers as best we can. But for storm in particular, there's a little bit less. So in terms of how we can really finagle the outcome here. And we have been working with staff to do this. They can tell you this is very different than where we started. We really honed in on the costs and the capital and the funding sources to get you kind of the best case scenario that we could at this point.
Well, and it sounds like too, the flip side of that is if we underfund, if we don't charge enough to pay enough people to keep up with the national requirements, then we're going to be paying even more money on penalties and fines and everything later. So it may not be very wise for us to postpone rate increases if it means we're going to get some huge bill for, having an unsafe water system. So I guess we
Nancy.
just have to really take your guidance.
Right. Nancy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that comment, that this shows, classic dilemma that we have is that we have two priorities, competing priorities. So one is to keep our rates low for our citizens, and the second is, to support environmental considerations. Both huge priorities, I think, for this council. And what Julie said about fines and so on, we've got to maintain it because, our next door neighbor was fined many, many millions of dollars for violating stormwater requirements. So, and we are certainly at risk since we're upstream from Colorado Springs. So it's a tough pill to swallow, but the choices are very narrow, as you said. So just supporting that perspective.
Yeah, I will also add, when it comes to federal requirements for stormwater, they are increasing over time. So not only are costs going up with inflation, the costs and the cost to maintain or stay in compliance with your permits are going up faster because the permit requirements are shifting as well. And this is something that all stormwater utilities are addressing. Anybody who has a permit and has these requirements it's a really tough conversation. Just that kind of reality that stormwater is being hit harder than a lot of other utilities right now because the regulatory requirements are increasing as well.
Okay. Do you have more? Was that it?
That's it, just questions. Well, key takeaways, you can see here, we've talked about all this. This is just kind of that underlying message that costs are going up faster than revenues. The utility needs to be self-sustaining. And then the recommended rate impacts here of that $2 in July, $2 in January, $2 the following January, and then the $1 annually beginning in 2026 is the initial recommendations.
Denise?
Mayor, I would like to ask council, do you want us to do some different scenarios and come back at another work session before we bring this for a vote? What is it that you would like for us to do next? Because right now we have it scheduled to bring next week as a first reading and a second reading. But if you're wanting some additional information and run some different scenarios and come back with that, we can do that at another work session and then get to a place where you feel comfortable to move forward. The other thing I can say is if you only wanted to move to only approve the rate case in June, that's the other thing you can do is just say, this is all we want to do right now. And then let's look and see where we are at the end of the year, go through and run some more scenarios and bring back next year another scenario. So that is another option that we can do. So I'm asking for direction from council.
I think I'd like to know what, and I guess I should probably know this more fluently, but to see what our capital improvement requirements are for our stormwater. The only thing that was mentioned in the slide specifically, unless I missed it, is the Pawnee Avenue storm drain. And I suspect somewhere among the city's many documents, we have one or more lists of things that need to be done and maybe a sense of urgency. So it would help me if I knew what we have to do in, say, the next 5 years. And then if we have really big projects that go beyond that, so we could do some long range planning. We get into the situation and this isn't the first time council's been here. We find we've got more expenses than we have money. And you're constantly trying to dig yourself out of a hole. It seems like, it's a problem that extends beyond the life of any given city council. It's multiple years. So if we could kind of begin to make progress and set up a system or a pattern, a process so that we can systematically just move forward, so that when we're all retired or whatever, the next generation of people running the city will be able to catch stride and push forward and not be in these god awful messes. It's my thought.
And thanks, Mayor. I think that's, I think that's what this staff is trying to do, right? As I said before, it would be Public Works Director would say, hey, we need, and they would estimate what they needed. We're trying to really provide the analysis and look at the budget and look at the capital, but we can look at that again, bring that back. And so what I'm hearing is that you'd like for us to come back for another a work session with some additional information. Is that what I heard?
I would certainly. Let's go around the table and see what council's thoughts are. Michelle, you want to start off?
I'm okay with not having an additional information.
Okay, Judith?
I think we have a little bit of time here because I think we can, our first rate increase, we have to have in place by July. So I'm always a fan of more information to make it, not only to make informed decisions, but when residents call us and say, and they're upset about their bill, it really better informs us to be really informed and knowledgeable about giving them the information that they need so they have a better understanding. So I think we have a little time to get a little bit more information. So I'd go in that direction. Thank you.
Nancy?
Yeah, I would like to go ahead and start getting this fixed. So I would but I'm fine with the compromise of just doing this year's approval until we can get more approving for this year's increase and then getting more information, looking at the entire program in greater depth later.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I think we need to bite the bullet and probably raise the rates for this year, at least. Thank you.
Okay. Natalie?
I'm also comfortable raising the rates for this year, but I would also like to have the bigger picture conversation when we get more information at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. Julie?
My concern about just raising the rates for this year is that if we're going to raise the rates again in January to avoid complete disaster, then we're going to have to start putting it on the agenda, which I understand is always too full for important things. So I really have concerns about kicking the can down the road, and I'm ready to go forward with first reading, even though I know I'm in the minority.
Okay, well, that's, I guess, it's occupational hazard, isn't it? Yeah, and I would like to have more information, but I could, in the near term, I could support, say, a $2 increase in July, so we could begin making some progress. But, and I think this is one of those, it's kind of a long-term project. So many of our projects are, but yeah, that's where I am.
So Mayor, what we'll do is go ahead and bring first reading next week for $2 only. And then in a second reading, that's kind of what I'm hearing at this time. And then we'll come back with some additional information as we, maybe at the water one, as we move forward, which will have a more comprehensive approach at that time. Is that okay? We just do the $2 for this year.
Yeah, is there any objection to that? Okay, I think that's direction to staff then. Okay, good. Did have a question. You talked about the model. Is this a software product that the city would use, or?
It's an Excel-based model. So it's something that, as I mentioned earlier, we will be delivering to staff once we've finalized the scenarios in the forecast.
Okay, thank you.
And this will save us a lot of money. This is one of the reasons why we selected this company. The others wouldn't share that. So, and what it helps is, let's say at the end of the year, you say raises are going to be a certain amount, right? We can put that in and then we'll see what that means for the model and what it looks like and where we'd have to cut and those things. So it gives us a bigger picture.
Okay, anything else on this? Council? Guess not. Okay, thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, certainly. Okay, council, let's see, we're halfway through. So the next item is discussion of plastics. I don't know, it'll take a long time. I was thinking maybe we should figure a break in at some point because Nancy's also going to be talking about community volunteers in our boards and commissions. Would council be okay with going ahead and entertaining this next item and then taking a break before the The last one? Any objections? Okay, let's do that. So let's go ahead. The next item is discussion concerning State Bill 21-1162, Plastic Pollution Reduction Act, and guidance from council concerning the way forward for Manitou Springs. And we've got the Chamber of Commerce here to tell us what they've studied and learned. And as this, I think you're all familiar with the custom, but we need your names and addresses to get started. Yeah, and then the microphone needs to be about 3 inches from your mouth. There, Annie.
How about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds okay.
I'm Annie Schmidt, 15 Keithley Place, Manitou Springs, Colorado, 80829. I know we have come before you with a lot of the similar information, so I don't need to read it word for word, but a little bit of background is that in 2021, the House passed a bill, House Bill 21-1160, that came into effect this year in 2023 in January 1st. Large retailers and grocery stores began charging a fee of 10 cents per bag for paper and plastic bags. In January of 2024, plastic bags will be banned and polystyrene cups and containers will be banned. By April of 2024, retailers are required to start remitting 60% of the fees collected since January 2023 and on a quarterly basis after that. And also in July of 2024, municipalities can enact more stringent laws to manage or restrict plastics. So we have been meeting with the city staff and looking at some different options of, we can go to the next slide, just the history, the ordinance, what other cities are doing, recommendations, next steps, and then questions. So the history in Manitou Springs, we can go to the next slide. In 2018, residents and businesses began meeting to discuss plastic-free opportunities for Manitou Springs. In 2019, Neil Minch launched the refillable program at the MAC where you can refill laundry and dish detergent. As I said earlier, the state passed HB 2021-1162 in 2021. 23 large businesses. Excuse me, I wasn't expecting to speak today. So thank you. Okay, so I've already gone through that slide. The next slide is about the ordinance. You've got it in your packet. I don't need to read that to you. We did put together some pros of following the state ordinance. Basically, it mitigates plastic bag pollution. It's consistent with neighboring communities in the Pikes Peak region. It allows us to gather more data to evaluate the impact of alternative bags. It helps to allow businesses to use up existing inventory without additional expenses. It still promotes the reduction of plastic and paper bags. The chamber is working on a bag campaign, encouraging visitors and locals to bring their own bag while still supporting the state ordinance. The state ordinance supports our values around sustainability, and we will be better prepared for next year's deadlines. Oh, you can move the slide. And then you can move it again. Thank you. The cons to an additional city ordinance, if we decided to add to the state ordinance, this may, things may change. So creating a city ordinance now could be fruitless. And the reason why we brought this up is that there have been numerous articles about other states who have had bills like this and have since rescinded the bills because there were unintended consequences and it wasn't working out the way they thought it was. And so we thought that if we just stay with what the state is recommending or what the state is doing, It may cause less problems in the future. This could be an increased expense to small businesses. The timeline to have, if we do have an additional city ordinance of June, is rather aggressive, and we're not sure if we can meet that. And also, is the city prepared for enforcement of the state ordinance now, much less an additional layer of enforcement by a city ordinance? And that's the question we don't know. Also, we think that not being consistent with nearby communities may cause confusion with residents and visitors alike. So our recommendations, you can go to the next slide, is to stick with what the state act is doing. But what we'd really like to do is start promoting a bring your own bag campaign in Manitou Springs. We're working on creating bring your own bag language for all businesses and residents. Since we no longer have a newspaper, we have lots of empty newspaper boxes that we could make little bag libraries around the town or something like that, to where people can bring bags or leave bags if they have extra ones. Basically, we want to push the bring your own bag mentality, basically just because it but also promote the right kind of bag to sell and promote, because we've done a lot of research on things like the carbon footprint of paper bags and cloth bags. And it's a lot worse than plastic bags. So it's a real difficult situation. And we feel that if we just stick with what the state is doing, we can get a little bit more information and find out what other states are doing. The next steps are to develop a campaign, which we've already somewhat been working on. The chamber and the city collaborate on public relations, launch the campaign in June, regroup in September to evaluate progress, and prepare for state launch in January. So that is basically the presentation. If any of you have any other questions about resources or what other communities are doing, just let us know.
Okay, great. Thank you. Guess we'll open up to questions and comments from council. Mr. Shada?
Yeah, I agree with your conclusion to kind of wait until the state happens. In January, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, in the packet, it seemed like there was a lot of information about how, the cloth bags and the whole 9 yards. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, just logically in January, what do you see happening in terms of, is this merchants downtown that have to kind of navigate this one by one? What are you thinking?
Well, right now, the way the state bill reads, they're not every merchant is involved.
Right.
And so basically what we would like to do is just start a do the right thing campaign. And so for smaller merchants who do have plastic bags now, just talk with them and say, hey, don't order anymore.
Right. Yeah, I get that. So I'm saying on the other side of plastic. Okay, let's say we flush through all of that. Okay. I'm trying to figure out what it looks like around January, or shall we say June of 2024, right? Then in theory, we're plastic free, right? So what I'm trying to figure out at that point in time, just what, and I just sort of kind of had an idea out of my head, which is, it seems like to me, the huge amount of visitors that we have come, okay, I think that's almost an impossible messaging thing to kind of tell somebody from Kansas to pack their cloth bag. And then especially when we're messaging, that the cloth bags aren't a good thing anyway. So that seems to me like a real disconnect. Okay. I mean, I use my cloth bag all the time. Okay. So what I'm trying to figure out is just, what does it look like on the ground here in June 2024? So one of the thoughts that I had was, maybe we ought to build something into, let's say, our parking enterprise, that the right kind of bag, whatever that is, okay? Since it seems pretty murky, given the materials you've sent us about what that is. So whatever the right bag is, okay, could we build something like that into, let's say, the parking fee so that those types of things are available to merchants downtown to give away or for people to pick up, let's say with the parking ambassadors or whatever. And maybe it's an opportunity to kind of, you know, have our branding on it. Okay. I don't know. I'm just trying to think out of the box in terms of what that looks like.
We have actually had a lot of conversations about that, like with the creative district, maybe pick an artist every year who designs the bag.
Right.
And then it gets into who manages that, who pays for that, who stores it. So
Well, and the other thing that I was wondering about too was is that if it was like maybe built into, let's say, our parking fees or something, if you turn them back in, maybe you can get $1 for it at the chamber or something like that. I don't know, so that maybe we get it kind of back in the system in some way. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of what does this look like in June and what do we want it to look like in June? I got really well educated in all your materials, but I still didn't get a picture of what does it look like June 1? What do we want to have in place? You know, what do we, you know what I'm saying?
yeah, well, we were expecting or thinking that maybe we would come here with an ordinance based on our last meeting. And now it's just like, wow, there are so many different balls to juggle and so many different, like, well, this is great. No,
Well, but to
no.
me, you said, and I think it's legitimate, and I'm sorry, John may cut me off at any moment here for talking too much, but it seems like we have an ordinance. I'm just leery about that's enforceable. I agree with your materials. Okay. So that's why I'm trying to figure out, you know, what is it that we want to have working and then figure out how to back into how to pay for it, so to speak. Okay. And I don't see how the enforcement thing of having a law and an ordinance and following tourists down the street and going, oh my gosh, where did you get that plastic bag from? It doesn't seem like a Manitou thing. It doesn't seem like we want what we want to have going on. It seems like to me what we want to have is good accessibility to whatever this thing is, okay, that we have yet to define, that we want to have in place by June. And then how do we have those materials and things ready for our visitors so that we're doing what we want to do? That's what I'm trying to kind of cut to the chase and say, hey,
that's exactly
how do we design? How do we design that program? What do you need out of the city? What kind of funding? What does that look like? The whole 9 yards. I mean, I'm interested in it because I think there's some great opportunities for kind of branding, for kind of setting the tone of what we're doing with this and complying without it being policing and all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're working towards. And one thing that you did bring up about how we're going to get people from Kansas to, bring their bags. One thing that we've discussed is having a real outreach to all of the lodging places and just say, hey, put this on your reservation and just say, if you smoke in the room, it's a $200 fee. If you bring a pet, it's a $25 fee. Colorado is a bring your own bag state. It's a step.
Yeah,
So there are all of these little
I get
steps.
some of that kind of stuff. So that I guess I'm just sort of a little leery. I mean, one of the things I know that I'm kind of encouraging some of the retailers I work with in downtown Manitou is that at checkout, look and see what they already have. Okay, because oftentimes they already have a bag from another store. And if you can get them to go, oh, will you put that in that other bag? Instead of just reflexively grabbing the bag off the rack
Right.
and handing them another dang plastic bag.
There's some
But-
businesses
but
that are.
when we don't have plastic in circulation, okay, That's what I'm trying to figure out in June. And I
Right.
guess I'm a little bit leery that of all the things that you have to read when you book something, okay? Do they have Wi-Fi? Are you allowed to smoke? Can you bring your dog? You know what I mean?
It's just.
Do you
a
have stairs and
suggestion.
everything? I'm just leery somebody coming from Kansas is going to come with the right bag. So that's why I'm just trying to figure out what kind of a program do we have for that 5%, 10%, 15% that show up without the bag? Because this isn't happening all over the country. And
Correct.
a large amount of our visitors are coming from places in which they're still using plastic like crazy. And this isn't in their pattern. And suddenly to arrive, well, you get the problem. I'll shut up.
Okay, thank you, John. Judith,
As you know, this is a issue that I'm extremely passionate about. I was thrilled when the bill passed. I supported it. And I think it's a really great step in the right direction. And I think at this point, I do agree with your recommendation that if we can just start by following it right now. I'm getting feedback from from people that it's already the larger stores like the grocery store, there's already an impact. We're seeing an impact of people not wanting to spend 10 cents. I want to caution everyone, having done a very deep dive and a lot of research on this, that it depends on what rubric you use when you're comparing whether it's cotton and it's environmental versus plastic. And bottom line is, even the article that you included in the packet, have the caveat of, well, plastic is really the worst thing because it never, disintegrates and it's horrible to marine life, et cetera, et cetera. So it depends. I mean, you have to be really careful and do the due diligence, which I think takes time. And there are several communities that have been trying to implement this and have had struggles, but I also caution us to look at what their problems are, because there are communities that are very resistant to this and they're having struggling. But so I really want us to look at, we have some communities here in the state of Colorado that are having tremendous success. And I brought an example. This is, and Breckenridge, the city of Breckenridge put this in place long before the bill passed. This is recycled plastic. This is their tourist bag, and how they monetize it. And I think it's a great idea. They have lots of information about their free, bus system and so on. I think it would be a perfect idea for local artists and maybe a seasonal thing. But how they fund it is the city purchases these bags in great bulk. So they get a tremendous discount. They get a great rate. And what they do is they provide these to the businesses and restaurants at cost or close to it. And then the businesses turn around and they sell it for a little markup from what they obtain it for. So it's a little boon to the business too. And it encourages the business owners to ask. So I was in Breckenridge and I only had time to go into about 6 stores and talk. The owners were wonderful. Asked them, how's it going? Because they have these hanging on the wall in a lot of places. And they said that they absolutely love it. And I happened to be in one store. I paid $1 for this bag. That was the cost that the business charges. I know I was talking to the business owner when another customer came in and I just kind of was watching that transaction. And when the person purchased their item, the owner said, would you like that packaged in a recyclable, sustainable Breckenridge bag? Didn't mention that it was cost $1. And the customer said, oh, absolutely. And just put the $1 on their ticket and everyone's happy. So I want us to really be really creative and mindful of all the ways that we can support our tourists. Because, I always travel with bags, but I'm not sure that, other people are going to come back and go, wow, make sure I bring my recyclable bag. So I think that they need to be readily available, maybe even at kiosks. So just thinking outside the box while we implement this, what the state is requiring, which I think is enough of a heavy lift right now for us all, right? As we move forward and inform us for an ordinance to come down the road. And I think that is keeping in with our vision for Plan Manitou. And I think that it's awesome that we're having this discussion. I'm really excited that this is happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, Julie.
I just want to comment real quick that I love the idea of having some bag available. I don't think it's bad to charge for it, but unlike Judith, I don't bring bags with me when I'm on vacation other than maybe a bag to put my dirty laundry in, but I don't like bring it around town with me in my rental car. So as much as, you may try to advertise to the world that, don't come to Manitou without your own bag. I think it's so much better for us to have them available. And I don't mind charging for them. I don't think we have to go crazy trying to figure out how to fund it ourselves. So just piggybacking on what you said, because I wouldn't want to put a lot of money or time into like telling the world to please bring your own bag, because like, who's even going to remember? I don't know. Thank you for what you're working on.
Great. Natalie?
Sure. So I like that you've gotten us up to this point to kind of, gauge where we are with things. And it sounds like we're pretty much on the same page. And I just want to say that, Judith was talking about these creative ideas. I think the Little Free Bag Library is fantastic. So I do think you've got some creative ideas here, and I'm kind of intrigued to see, because I know friends, well, I do too, but people have bags in their house. And so we can get those out into the world. So I look forward to the next presentation, certainly.
Great, thank you. And Nancy, did you want to weigh in?
I did. I also thank you for the work, and I'm pleased with what you've come up with, the proposal you've come up with. I do have a question for clarification. If we just fall under the state requirement at this point, who is responsible for enforcement?
Probably us. And
So it's not like a liquor, or cigarettes, the state sends in people to,
not that I've heard of, and that is the challenge, as we know, with many of the state requirements, is they require something with a mandate with no funding to make it happen.
yeah, okay, thanks. Whatever. It does sound like it provides us a great deal of flexibility. So the intent of this whole thing is very clear. It's the how that continues to remain a bit ambiguous. And I think that when you're dealing with something like this, that a slower approach is a correct approach. And I love your concept of, kind of a campaign of do the right thing. And it's my understanding that most of our tourists currently come from Colorado. Is that a correct assumption?
Leslie Lewis, Manitou Springs Chamber of Commerce. That is, Colorado is our #1 visitor state, followed by Texas.
Okay. And we know Texas wouldn't have anything like this.
No,
Sorry,
and
I
neither
should have
does
said that.
Kansas. Neither does Kansas, because I had some Kansans come in and go, you did not warn me about bringing bags.
Well, the bags can
Sorry.
still be available. I mean, bags can still very much be available if they're recyclable paper bags, correct?
Yes, but even the
They'll
recyclable
be just-
paper, the large grocery stores, the large stores that don't fit the exemption in the state law do have to charge for those
Right,
as
right.
well.
Yeah, but anyway, so, it's a culture change, and I think Judith's continuing to look at the success stories around the state, because they're going to come in more and more as time goes by with this. So again, thank you for the work that you've done, and I like the progress, your recommendations so far. Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. And Judith, I really like the bags that you presented also. That's pretty cool. And I like the idea of like the little bags, kind of like the little library. And I have no problem charging, $1 per bag. And like Councillor Fortune said, yes, change is inevitable. And in the beginning, it's going to be kind of rough going, but it's all going to be for the best. And in addition, I'm 7 days post-op surgery. So Mayor Graham will need to excuse myself because I'm not feeling very good right now.
We understand and we appreciate your hanging in there, Michelle. So that good hearty spirit. I can see why you're a marathon runner. Good. So
Thank
get
you.
some rest, get better.
Have a
See you
good
soon.
night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, and yeah, ladies, I like what you propose, so I would say full speed ahead, have something in June, rethink it in September. And to Judith's point, it seems like those are pretty neat souvenir bags. I could see people in Texas going into their grocery store carrying free advertising for Manitou Springs, so maybe there's a silver lining in this. Council, anything else on this subject?
Yeah, I just wanted to say back when Trader Joe's wasn't around the entire country, you could go in, I lived in Washington, there are like 5 Trader Joe's within a couple miles of my house. And I would always buy the reusable bags. And when I would travel, I would use them and people would always say, oh, where's the Trader Joe's around here? And it was great advertisement for Trader Joe's.
I
anyway.
forgot all about that. I lived in Oregon and same thing because Trader Joe's had awesome designs on their bags and I would always be asked. So I think that this is a great, incentive. Thanks.
Okay, great. Council, anything else on this subject? I guess not. Ladies, thank you very much. We appreciate the work you've done. Go forth and do more good work. Council, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and finish off. Okay, so our last topic for this evening is item 4. Recruiting and retaining high-quality community volunteers to serve and develop a high-functioning relationship between those volunteers and the council. And you'll remember last year that Nancy had done sort of a preliminary report on this. And at the time, we had many other things going on. It seemed like it was worth bringing back. I think there were I got some comments from several council members that they reported the boards were a little bit frustrated. So without further ado, Nancy, you have the floor.
Go to the next slide, please. Just kind of reiterating what John just said, why is this topic being brought before council? At the February 2022 retreat, you'll remember that we had a looming recreational marijuana vote in Colorado Springs, which caused us to take a strategic look at our budget and determine how new sources of revenue might be attained, as well as how we might garner more efficiency and effectiveness within our city. So since human capital is usually the most resource intensive part of an organization, you guys asked me to take a closer look at that. So I came back to council last July with a framework designed to help us make decisions, hopefully to help us make decisions to ensure we're using our human capital in a way to maximize our effectiveness and efficiency. So then Mayor Graham looked at that briefing and asked me to look a little bit more closely, not just or specifically at boards and commissions. So that's what I did. So next slide, please. So this is this slide and the next slide are out of that framework briefing that I presented last July. And it's very council centric. And what can we as a council specifically do to influence human capital? And I propose that we've got basically 3 tools to do that with: policy, resourcing, and influence. And in my discussions with boards and commissions, it comes across that we do policy and resourcing, I think, pretty well, but we probably could do better with influence. Influence being things that we could set priorities for the boards and commissions, establish values and our vision for our city, which will guide us as we develop policy and allocate resources and so on. So next slide, please. So this was the second slide out of that briefing that I gave last July. And this was just, again, specifically pertaining to boards, commissions, and committees. And it just shows how it's an example of a way to use the framework in order to come up with a program or action steps to make things better, to accomplish that goal the goal that's stated on recruiting and retaining high quality community volunteers to serve and develop high functioning relationship between volunteers, council, and staff. Next slide, please. And I'm trying to go through this as quickly as I can. So methodology that I used. Ultimately, the desired outcome that I had was what is going well and what can be improved. So I went back and reviewed the 2017 report on the role of boards, committees, and commissions, and that was in your packet if you were interested in that. I found it to be a very valuable report both then and now. And then reviewing the amendments and the ordinance pertaining to boards and commissions that we have done in the city. And then I interviewed each chairperson of each board, committee, and commission identified in the code, which include PARAB, OSAC, Planning Commission, MAPS, HAB, HPC, and MATCH. And I had a very limited discussion with some staff members, and I did not do any discussion with council liaisons. And I did that. My methodology, I was really trying to limit the scope in what I was doing. And just because it's often easier to do things a little bit more simply initially and then expand out from there, depending on what you guys all decide. So I did not include groups such as the URA. Oh, actually, I did end up interviewing the URA before I decided to narrow the scope even further. But the Chamber Board, the Hiawatha Gardens Task Force, the Library Task Force, the Mineral Springs Foundation, the Climate Action Work Group, the Metro Board, Save the Flats, et cetera. So there are a lot of groups, volunteer groups within the city that the city does have relationships with through either an MOU, resolution or law or whatever. So all of those groups that I just mentioned, we do have the city does have a formal relationship with. But again, I narrow the focus just to those boards that are talked about in the ordinance that I referenced. And as importantly, I did not interview the council liaisons to this group. Well, tonight is an opportunity for you each to give your perspectives. Let's see. Next slide, please. So since that 2017 report, it was very refreshing, I think, to see a report that was commissioned, basically, that was paid for by the council at the time. In fact, Mayor Nicoletta did commission the study because things were at a particularly low point, I think, in the city then, and she was looking for a way to improve that relationship, those relationships. The boards and committees morale was very low. But I think that there were a lot of very positive and significant things that were done as a result of that study. The HAB and the match were added and the Transportation and Parking Board was changed to the maps with new functions and roles. Member appointments were greatly streamlined. It used to be that you'd be in a board or committee meeting and a member would show up and say, oh yeah, I got appointed by council, and the board or committee had no idea that they had a new member appointed. So that, and you've all participated in that, and I think that's much better. The city staff liaison role was better defined, and I think that is demonstrable how much better that has that those relationships are working now than they were 7 years ago. And perhaps even the pendulum has swung too far, that the staff is potentially providing too much support. It's unclear to me at this point, but I think we need to keep an eye on that. The chair now has complete authority to prepare the agenda. Previously, staff was preparing the agenda and directing the boards and committees what to do. And that was probably not appropriate. And any number of other things were done. But it's been 6 years since that report, and it's probably time to reassess and build on the positive changes that have occurred. So that's kind of why I went and did this assessment. So next slide. So what is going well? And again, I spent quite a bit of time with all the board chairs. I did not interview the boards or commissions as a whole, just the chairs. So, and everything was not unanimous, but it was majority of those things that are going well and those things that are not going so well. So things that, as I mentioned, the staff liaisons, much better. Process for new members, as I mentioned, much better. Very important, I think, is that boards, committees, and commissions are filling up. We're seeing a higher percentage of seats filled. And you can see on I think it's the very last slide in the backups, you'll see exactly where the openings still are. The boards and committees know that they cannot direct staff, and that was not as clear 7 years ago. I would say that the committee, the volunteers are very community and service minded, and they want to contribute. They're very enthusiastic, and they have a sense of person, and they are very committed. For the annual budget brief, which you heard Neil talk tonight, which the rest of the boards and committees and commissions did last November, for the most part, they found those briefings of value, but only because it gave them face time with council. There was a lot of concern if how much value there was, or that there probably could be a lot more value if the format was more tailored and targeted to what the outcome could have been at that. So for instance, if if you'll remember, council gave almost no guidance to the boards or committees that night. And it was designed to have a dialogue and to get guidance and set priorities and so on, and that didn't happen. So my assessment is that if there were a better structured and thought out event, it might prove of much more value to both the councils and the boards, committees, and commissions. And we also know that several of them, the budget brief may be out of sync, as we saw tonight. So depending on when they do their annual plans, there might be a better time to have that budget meeting, and do they all come at once, or should they come, once a month? And we just have more face time as a council with them. Oops, sorry. Next slide, please. So what can be improved? I already talked a little bit about the budget brief, but when you think about it, we have 7 formal boards, committees, and commissions with a minimum of 7 members on each. So that means that we have 49 volunteers, a minimum of 49 volunteers out there who meet generally about 12 meetings per year and 2 hours per meeting, which comes out to over 1,000 hours of volunteer time. And if you look at the value of volunteer in Colorado, it's a little over $31 per hour. So we're talking well over $37,000 per year we get in volunteer. And that's a fraction of the volunteers that we have supporting the city. And most on the boards, committees, and commissions do well in excess of 2 hours per month. They do correspondence, setting agendas, researching topics, attending other meetings, public outreach, letters of recommendations, council presentations, et cetera. So we really get a significant amount of value added from these folks. So how can we improve council and board, committee, and commission relationships and communication? My number one, if I were to prioritize these, my number one recommendation would be that we define and codify the council liaison role. This is what I heard by far the most from all of the committee chairs, is that they don't know what the council liaison is supposed to do. And it seems to be different depending on who the council liaison is. And so on. So and get that into the code on boards, committees, and commissions. And I will tell you that when the ordinance was totally rewritten back in 2019, I believe, that was in the draft copy, but the council at the time took it out. So I would strongly support putting that back in. And I would say that if we go back, this is the 2017 report, and a lot of it is recommendations for what the wording could be, or if we did decide to codify that. I have a memory that one council member in particular did not want it in there. But other than that, I would prefer not to recall. Let's see, the other thing that the second priority that I would recommend is to hire a facilitator or consultant to assist the boards, committees, or particularly the boards and committees. The commissions work quite well already. There's some concerns, particularly by the HPC, but the others are required to make annual plans, and a lot of them just don't have that skill set to really do that. And I know a couple of years ago, Denise worked with the OSAC to come up with an annual plan. And they also have a member, Nancy Wilson, who is very, very skilled at doing annual plans and strategic plans and so on. And that was very, very, very helpful. And OSAC is a very high functioning board, or they're called a committee. I would also say, training in budget. For instance, Danufat knows the budget, the Conservation Trust Fund budget better than anyone except maybe Becca. But most of the boards and commissions do not understand the budget process at all. And they don't. I had one board chair tell me that he needed money. He should have been included in the budget. And I went back to his budget brief that he gave in November, and he didn't ask for any money. So, we weren't about to approve something that wasn't asked for. So there's just some, I think, some hiring a facilitator consultant that could standardize those things and help them come up with these plans and so on, we would be able to mine a lot of efficiency and effectiveness if we did that, get a lot more out of those volunteer hours. We talked about appreciation. Is there a way we could show additional appreciation to the volunteers? One of the things that came up, which seemed to make a lot of sense, was that parking hours, because several of the boards have changed their meeting time and it's not reflected on the front on the website yet, to accommodate staff. So for instance, Planning Commission, I think, is at 5:30 now, so that staff doesn't have to stay as late. And there's a couple of boards that have done that. So that means that the volunteers are having to come potentially and park downtown and pay for parking. And so that might show appreciation if we could do something like that, or give them a certificate for when they depart a board or commission, just some more recognition. There's also a great deal of value in all of them hearing what they are all doing. And that was also mentioned at the for the budget briefing that we do in November, is that it helped them to hear what all the other boards and committees are doing. So we might want to incorporate something along those lines. Most of them said that we should consider term limits for the officers, not for the members, but at least it's very tricky to do. They identified a lot of the issues that might come with identifying term limits even for officers, but they all but one of them, I think, said that it should at least be considered and looked at. Most of them asked for additional training. Again, a consultant might be able to help with that. And then targeted recruiting for people with specific skill sets. Right now, we pretty much are thrilled with anybody who wants to volunteer. And if we can get enough people volunteering, we might be able to look at people who are more qualified, or not, that's a bad term, but more adept at what the board or committee is doing. And sometimes that might be even just executive skills. As I mentioned, Nancy Wilson is very good at the executive skill level. And that can be again, beneficial in getting effectiveness and efficiencies. So, so that's pretty much it. And I go 2 slides, advance 2 slides. Yeah. An interesting thing is, if I asked them all who they work for, and most of them, I think correctly, in many ways said the citizens. But if you look at this, really they work for council, which is why this is more of a responsibility to build on the successes we've had. It's a council responsibility versus a staff responsibility. And city council works directly for the citizens. The boards and commissions work for city council and so on. So that's that. I thought that was a good graphic to show tonight as well. So that is my very quick briefing. What questions, comments, guidance, suggestions do you have?
So open it up to, Natalie.
Well, I just thought of something when you were presenting, and I just thought I'd throw it out there too. One of the things that I've personally done is I'm presenting on an item, and one, I forget to ask for any sort of a recommendation from the advisory board that's connected to the presentation. And 2, I forget to invite them to the meeting when we're discussing it. And so I was just wondering if in Judy's memo that we fill out, if there should be 2 additional lines, and one that says, would this presentation be better with a recommendation from an advisory board or committee? And 2, are there advisory boards or committees that should be invited or be informed that this topic is being discussed, just so it triggers in my head, maybe who should be in the room when we're having the conversations? Because I'm always surprised when we have a question and there's no one there to answer it. And I don't know, I just thought that would help improve maybe council's connection to those advisory boards.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, Natalie, and I will incorporate that into the recommendations. And just so that you know, I did invite all the chairs tonight and ask them to invite their boards, committees, et cetera. But I don't know if any of them are zooming in or not, so.
Yeah, and I don't have solid next steps aside from the fact that I think this is important work. And I'm glad that this is something that you keep bringing to our attention.
Thank you. Other comments? Judith, go.
Could you define targeted recruiting for me?
Sure. For instance, we've seen, HPC does have targeted recruiting actually, because they have specific requirements in the ordinance, which we probably have to revisit because, and I didn't get into the specifics of roles and functions for all the boards and commissions, but that was something that HPC brought up. It's very difficult for them to recruit an architect or a historic preservation specialist or so on. So they're not in compliance actually currently with the ordinance as it's written, but that would be the sort of thing. So we know on HAB, they've got several social workers, which is probably a good thing to have on HAB, but they, land use development would have been very helpful on the HAB as well. I know that Alan Delwich does a lot of, he does most of his own recruiting, and he looks for specific skill sets that would be of great value, whether it be a developer or a real estate agent or whatever to be on the planning commission. So that's what I meant by targeted recruiting.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess something that came to mind is that really, I guess when Nancy said that you have seven boards with 7 members, there's 49 people that we basically increased the skill sets and the talent pool of the city. That's important. And to be able to use people effectively or to get them, fully engaged, having some sense of direction for the city as a whole is taking, I think might inform some of the things that they're doing. And so if we've talked about homelessness, sometimes it's a reactive thing. We're talking about problems. We're trying to figure out solutions. I think it's been suggested a couple of times that HAB take a look at homelessness. And I'm rambling here a little bit, but I'm thinking if there's some things that we as a council see that we have a lot of common interest in, if we see the opportunity for one of the boards or commissions to kind of work that problem, I think we should make that clear to them and see if we can get buy-in from them. One of my observations too, and this was several years ago with the parking, then called the parking board, they had something I think like 15 or 20 projects. They had this goals list that they just sat down and started dreaming, I think. And it was just really too much to execute to. So I think it was Roy's guidance. He suggested that they identify a handful of doable projects, 2 or 3 is a good number to get done. So that may be something too that we'd want to encourage. Does anybody want to, mention next steps now, or we can kind of mull this over and come back to it later? We may be pretty well talked out tonight, I think. I see a lot of tired faces. Okay, well, Nancy, thank you for what you did. Let's hang on to those thoughts and we'll do something in the future. Okay, if there's no objections, let's move on to council correspondence. I've got 2 things. One, I think I mentioned this several months ago because I thought it was going to happen sooner. But my understanding is today that El Paso County was a little west of here, up on just off of Highway 24, and they cleaned out a major homeless camp. There weren't that many people living there, I think, but they had there's quite a bit of debris. So they went in there. They took the El Paso County Sheriff's Office with them, so they got that cleaned up. This has been something that's been on the city's list since last summer. And it's outside of our jurisdiction. We had to get cooperation from El Paso County. And the county doesn't have an efficient way of doing this either, where the state laws don't really help us out. But they got that cleaned up. It reduces the fire hazard, but it's a continuing problem. But anyway, today we had some success, and it may be going on in tomorrow and the next couple of days as well. The other thing is I think in early April, we'll probably take a look at the community survey. So if you have ideas of things that you want to have answered, the kinds of questions that you want to ask, I would encourage you to give that a little bit of thought now. And when you have those ideas, email them to Alex so he can begin compiling some of the things that council's looking for. Who else has got something? Natalie.
So the chamber is trying to do these like, I don't know, coffee with the chamber or whatever events. And they have one this Thursday at 5:30 at Manitou Brewing. And so if you are interested in talking to chamber members about anything, it's kind of like the coffee with the city administrator. So I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and that was 5:30. When?
5:30 on Thursday.
Okay, Thursday at Manitou Brewing.
Yeah, and so they're going to pick a different location each time, and they're going to do one, I think like 1 month in the morning and then one the next month in the evening to try to capture different.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This Thursday.
Anything else? Okay, let's go to the city administrator's report. Roy?
The only thing I have is the arborist will be doing a tree inventory once the trees start leafing to see, any winter kill and what needs to be replaced. That's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Denise?
I just have a couple of dates that I want to bring up again. The Manny Awards is March 23rd. Please RSVP for those. And then the COVID vaccine clinic is March 22nd here, free. So please get the word out for that. And then we've been getting a lot of questions about an upcoming blood drive, and we do have that scheduled for April 19th. So I want to get those dates out there for everyone. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. If there's no objections, we'll stand adjourned.